Hello there, and welcome to Life Beyond Seen, where curiosity slows down, strange questions are allowed to breathe, and science takes the long, quiet way around the world before sleep. Tonight, we are leaving the warm lights of land behind and drifting toward a place where the ocean keeps its voice low. Not to a coral garden, not to a shipwreck, and not to one of those dramatic sea monsters sailors used to draw on maps when they ran out of facts and became creative. We're going to a real place beneath the water, a place made of stone, shadow, sharp edges, flat surfaces, and questions that have not settled neatly into one answer. Far below the surface, off the coast of Yonaguni Island in Japan, there is a formation on the seafloor that looks, at first glance, as if it should have a simple explanation. It has broad terraces, it has straight-looking lines, it has steps, ledges, corners, and faces that seem almost too organised for a place ruled by waves, currents, fish and time. Divers have compared it to a monument, a pyramid, a ruin, a ceremonial platform, and sometimes just a very stubborn piece of geology that happens to enjoy confusing everyone. And that really is where the trouble begins, because the human mind is very good at noticing shapes. We see faces in clouds, animals in shadows, and sometimes an entire ancient civilization in a pile of old stones. But every so often, a shape appears that does not let the question go so easily. This underwater structure has been argued over for decades. Some people look at it and say, quite calmly, that it is natural rock. They point to the sandstone, the fractures, the bedding planes, the way stone can split into flat surfaces and angular steps when the right kinds of pressure and erosion work on it for long enough. Nature, after all, does not always make soft curves. It can make columns, hexagons, cliffs, caves, arches and coastlines that look as if some patient builder has been working the night shift for a few million years. Other people look at the same formation and find it difficult to believe that waves and cracking stone could produce something that appears so arranged. They notice what look like stairways, platforms, channels, and broad flat areas. They wonder if an ancient people might have shaped it when the sea level was lower, before the water rose and covered it. And between those two views lies a long, quiet space full of maybes. That is the mood of tonight's journey. Not a rush to solve everything, not a loud argument over who is right. More like sitting beside a window during a soft rain, looking at an old photograph and noticing one small detail that makes the whole picture harder to understand. Because the deep ocean has a way of doing that. It hides things, but it also preserves them. It wears stone down, but it also keeps secrets in places where humans cannot easily reach. It takes what was once dry, bright, and open to the air and covers it with blue distance. And then, many years later, someone with a mask, a tank, and a perfectly reasonable plan to look at fish comes across something on the seafloor that makes people start using words like lost, ancient, impossible, and maybe. So before we sink gently into the details, let me ask you this. Where are you listening from tonight, and how close are you to the sea? Are you somewhere inland, with streets and rooftops around you, far from the sound of waves? Are you near a coast, where the air smells faintly of salt and rain, and gulls behave as if they personally own the morning? Or are you listening late at night, somewhere quiet, with no ocean nearby at all, but with the thought of deep water slowly forming in your mind? It is a strange thing, isn't it? How the ocean can feel close even when it is far away. A map may say it is hundreds of miles from you, but the idea of it arrives instantly. Dark water, slow currents, stone under pressure, a diver's lamp moving across a wall that may be natural or may not be. And if this kind of gentle mystery is the sort of thing you enjoy drifting through, I'd be very grateful if you gave the video a like, subscribed, or left a small note in the comments. Nothing dramatic, of course. No need to carve it into a submerged stone terrace and leave it for future archaeologists, although that would certainly improve engagement in a very long-term way. A simple click is more than enough. It helps this quiet little corner of the internet reach other curious people who might enjoy a calm question at the edge of sleep. People who like science, history, the deep sea, and the kind of mystery that does not shout for attention, but waits patiently in the dark until someone notices it. Now, settle in. Let your shoulders loosen. Let the day place itself somewhere behind you. There is no need to solve the entire ocean tonight. That would be a bit much for bedtime, and frankly the ocean has had a considerable head start. Tonight we will simply approach one mystery carefully. We will look at the underwater structure people call the Yonaguni Monument. We will move slowly through what it looks like, how it was found, why some believe it may show signs of human design, and why many geologists argue that the explanation may be much older and less mysterious, though no less interesting. Because sometimes the natural world can make something that looks designed, and sometimes the past can leave marks that are difficult to separate from accident. The hard part is knowing which one we are seeing. The formation itself rests beneath clear, moving water near Yonaguni, the westernmost inhabited island of Japan. It lies closer to Taiwan than to Tokyo, in a part of the world where sea roots, storms, reefs, and deep currents have shaped human life for a very long time. Yonaguni is not a place that feels detached from the ocean. It is defined by it. Around the island, the water can be bright and blue near the surface, but below that brightness are slopes, shadows, sudden drops, and stone forms that appear and disappear as the water moves. Divers come to this region for marine life, especially in certain seasons when hammerhead sharks pass through the area. That alone would be enough to make a dive memorable. Most people do not need a possible ancient monument added to the itinerary. A hammerhead shark is already a fairly strong talking point. But the seafloor had something else waiting. In the 1980s, a local diver came across an unusual formation while exploring the waters near the island. What he saw did not look like a random jumble of rocks. It appeared large, flat, stepped, and strangely regular. Underwater, a person's sense of scale can become uncertain. Distances change, light bends, a ledge can look closer than it is, and a shadow can make a crack seem like a doorway. But even allowing for the tricks of the sea, this formation stood out. It was not simply a boulder, it was not simply a reef, it looked like something with structure. Imagine descending through clear water, the sound of your own breathing steady in your ears. Above you, the surface ripples like a moving ceiling. Around you, fish shift away in small flashes. The light fades little by little, not into total darkness, but into that blue underwater dimness where every object seems slightly removed from ordinary life. Then the seabed rises ahead of you. At first, it might look like a cliff. Then your lamp or your eyes begin to separate the shapes. A flat platform, a hard edge, a drop. Another ledge below it, a long side that seems too straight, a corner that seems too clean, something like steps leading nowhere a person can walk without fins. And even if you are cautious, even if you know that nature can make strange forms, a thought arrives. Was this made? That question is powerful because it is simple. It does not require a degree in geology to feel it. Anyone can look at a photograph of the formation and understand why people are drawn to it. We're used to associating straight lines and right angles with human work. Houses have them, temples have them, roads, walls, platforms and stairs have them. Nature in our everyday experience tends to feel uneven. Trees bend, rivers curve, hills roll. Sand piles and clouds do not usually arrange themselves into crisp, stepped shapes. So when stone under the ocean appears to present those features, the imagination wakes up. It starts placing people there. It starts draining the water away. It starts asking what the site might have looked like in sunlight. This is where the mystery becomes delicate, because what seems obvious to the eye is not always obvious to science. A shape that looks carved may have split along natural planes. A flat surface may be a bedding layer in sedimentary rock. A clean edge may be the result of fractures crossing at near right angles. Sandstone and mudstone under stress can crack, break, and weather in ways that produce terraces and sharp faces. Along coastlines, cliffs often form steps where layers of different hardness erode at different rates. If those same processes happen below water, or if a landform was shaped before it sank or before sea levels changed, the results can look surprisingly architectural. Nature does not need a blueprint. It only needs material, weakness, pressure, water, and time. Which, to be fair, is still a fairly impressive toolkit. At the same time, it is also true that ancient people lived along coasts that are no longer coastlines. After the last ice age, sea levels rose and covered large areas of land that once would have been available to human communities. Around the world, archaeologists now pay close attention to submerged landscapes, because many ancient shorelines are underwater. People have always liked living near water. It offers food, transport, trade, and a convenient place to stare thoughtfully when life becomes complicated. So the idea that something human-made could now rest below the waves is not impossible in itself. There are real submerged sites in different parts of the world. Harbours, settlements, tools, walls, and remains of human activity have been found beneath the sea. The question is not whether humans ever built things that later became submerged. They did. The question is whether this particular formation is one of those things, and that is a much harder question. It needs evidence, not only shapes that resemble architecture, but clear signs of human work. Tool marks, detached blocks moved into position, artifacts in a secure context, pottery, bones, hearths, anchors, inscriptions, construction patterns, or anything that can be studied carefully and compared with known human activity. Without that, the eye can lead us into uncertainty. A terrace might be a platform, or it might be a bedding plane. A channel might be a road, or it might be erosion. A mark might be carving, or it might be a scratch. The seafloor does not label its evidence politely. It does not put up a small plaque saying, "Naturally fractured sandstone, please enjoy responsibly." It simply sits there while humans argue above it. This is part of what makes the Yonaguni Formation so useful for a calm night of thinking. It is not only a question about one place under the water. It is a question about how we decide what counts as proof. It asks us to notice the difference between appearance and evidence, between wonder and certainty, between the very human wish for a lost story and the equally human need to test that story carefully. It also reminds us that scientific disagreement is not always a failure. Sometimes it is the process doing exactly what it should do. One person proposes an explanation, another examines the rock, another looks at the local geology, another asks whether sea levels could match the timeline, another wants artifacts, another says the current is too strong, another says the shape is too strange. Slowly, piece by piece, the mystery is pressed from different sides. That may sound less exciting than announcing that an ancient civilization built a secret underwater city and then vanished, but in truth, it is far more interesting. Because real mysteries do not become smaller when we handle them carefully. They often become deeper. If the formation is human-made, then it would raise enormous questions about ancient coastal communities in the region, their abilities, their relationship with the sea, and what was lost when the water rose or the land changed. If it is natural, then it becomes a remarkable example of how geology can imitate architecture so convincingly that it stirs decades of debate. Either way, we learn something. Either way, the seafloor has managed to make us look more closely. There is also something comforting about a mystery that has stayed in place for so long. It is not chasing us. It is not demanding an immediate answer. It is down there in the slow water, surrounded by fish, currents, and filtered light. While people on land write articles, make documentaries, post arguments online, and occasionally become very confident after seeing 3 photographs, the structure remains exactly where it is. It does not argue back. It does not clarify. It simply offers its surfaces to the next diver, the next researcher, the next person willing to look and admit that the world still contains things that are not easy to sort. And perhaps that is why underwater mysteries feel different from mysteries on land. On land, a ruin sits in the open air. You can walk around it, measure it, return to it easily, photograph it from every side, dig nearby, compare layers, and bring in teams with equipment. Underwater, everything becomes harder. Time is limited. Movement is slower. Visibility changes. Currents interfere. Equipment matters. Even simple observation becomes an event. A stone edge that seems clear in one dive may look different in another light. Sand shifts. Marine growth covers surfaces. A place can be known and still feel hidden. The water itself becomes part of the mystery, not because it is magical, but because it makes certainty more difficult. So tonight, as we begin, we will not treat the ocean as a stage for wild claims. We will treat it as a place where evidence is hard won and patience matters. We will not pretend every straight line is a staircase, and we will not pretend every strange formation is ordinary just because nature is capable of strange things. We will stay in the middle, where curiosity can remain awake even as the body rests. We will let the mystery be a mystery long enough to understand it. Picture the island first. Yonaguni, small against the surrounding sea. Cliffs, wind, salt, and water moving with real force. Beneath that water, a stone mass with a main platform and angular faces. Divers approach it carefully. Some see a monument, some see a natural outcrop, some see a little of both, which is often where the most interesting thoughts begin. Because there is a possibility that the formation may be natural but later noticed, used or slightly modified by people. There is also a possibility that the human eye is adding intention where none exists. There is a possibility that the answer is mostly geology, with a few details still unresolved. The deep sea is very good at making tidy conclusions feel slightly premature, and that is where our slow journey begins, not with an answer, but with a shape. A large shape on the seafloor found by accident, seen through moving water, and argued over ever since. In the next stretch of our drifting investigation, we will move closer to that shape itself. We will look at its terraces, its ledges, its hard angles, and the features that made people wonder whether the ocean was hiding a ruin, or whether stone, pressure, and time had built something that only looked like one. As we move closer to the thing itself, it helps to forget, just for a moment, all the arguments that have gathered around it. Put aside the big claims, the lost cities, the neat explanations, the dramatic headlines, and the very confident people on both sides who have never had to fin gently through a strong current while trying not to bump into a suspiciously rectangular rock. For now, let us simply look. The Yonaguni Monument sits beneath the water near Yonaguni Island, far out in Okinawa Prefecture, at the western edge of Japan, in a place where the sea is not only scenery but a constant presence. Official Japanese tourism material describes the main formation as a rectangular rock mass about 100 metres by 60 metres, rising about 25 metres from the surrounding seafloor with other angular structures nearby. That is already a large object to meet underwater. On land, something 25 metres tall would be a building you noticed from the street. Beneath the sea, it becomes stranger because there is no street, no sign, no railing, and no polite little visitor centre selling postcards and slightly overpriced coffee. Approaching it in the mind, you can imagine the water first, clear in places, blue and shifting, but never perfectly still. A diver descends with slow movements, breathing through a regulator, hearing that steady in and out sound that makes every dive feel a little private. Above, the surface is bright and restless. Below, the seabed begins to take form not all at once but in pieces. A wall, a drop, a pale line of stone, a ledge too wide to ignore. Then the shape starts to arrange itself. It does not look like a single rounded mound. It does not look like a heap of broken rock thrown around without order. It has levels, it has hard faces, it has broad flat sections that seem to run across the formation in a way that makes the eye pause. This is where the human brain begins to get involved, which is always both useful and a little risky. The brain says, "That looks like a step." Then it says, "That looks like a platform." Then, if it has had a long day and perhaps too much coffee, it may whisper, "That looks like a temple." The shape has often been described as ziggurat-like, because from some angles it seems to rise in tiers, with one level giving way to another, rather than sloping gently like a normal underwater hill. Britannica describes it as an underwater rock structure discovered in the mid-1980s near Yonaguni Island, and summarises the disagreement clearly. Some people interpret it as the remains of an ancient city, while others argue that it was naturally formed. That word, ziggurat-like, is doing a lot of work. It does not prove anything by itself. It only tells us that the form reminds people of stepped architecture. The comparison is understandable. Ancient stepped monuments exist in many places, and when we see a large structure with flat ledges and vertical drops, the mind reaches for familiar categories: stairs, terraces, platforms, walls. It is not foolish to notice the resemblance. The problem begins only when resemblance is treated as proof. A cloud may look like a rabbit, but it is very rarely on its way to a carrot. Still, the impression is strong. The monument's broad surfaces are one reason it became famous. Some sections appear almost level, like decks cut into the stone. Others fall away in sharp drops. There are places where the edges seem to run in long straight lines, and places where corners appear close enough to right angles to make a person lean forward in the chair. The eye naturally compares them with things humans make, because human construction often favours straightness, flatness, and repeated levels. We build stairs because legs are difficult things to operate on a cliff. We build platforms because we like level ground. We cut channels because water is badly behaved and less persuaded. So when a formation underwater seems to have those features, the simplest visual reaction is not geology. It is architecture, and architecture means people, and people mean stories, and stories, once they arrive, are very difficult to ask politely to leave. One of the most striking features often mentioned by divers and writers is the presence of what look like steps. These are not small household steps, of course. No one is suggesting an ancient person was popping down there to fetch a cup of tea from the lower terrace. The step-like forms are huge. Some are too tall and irregular to function as ordinary stairs for ordinary walking, especially if imagined on dry land. That point matters because a natural ledge can look like a step without being designed as one. If a layer of rock breaks away, or if softer material erodes faster than harder material, a staircase-like profile can appear. Cliffs do this. Shore platforms do this. Layered sedimentary rocks can do this. The sea, given enough time and enough weak lines in the stone, can make ledges that appear planned. Not because the sea has a secret career in urban design, but because rock often breaks where it is already prepared to break. The same caution applies to the flat terraces. A terrace, when seen from above, can feel like a deliberate surface. It invites the imagination to place people on it. Perhaps they gathered there. Perhaps they watched the horizon. Perhaps there was a ritual, a building, a fire, a carved marker, or a person whose job was mainly to tell everyone not to stand too close to the edge. But geology has its own ways of producing flatness. Sedimentary rock forms in layers. Those layers can split along bedding planes, leaving broad surfaces that seem surprisingly even. If the layers are tilted or broken by tectonic forces, the result can be a stack of ledges and walls. Yonaguni lies in a region shaped by tectonic activity, and geological commentary on the island notes sandstone, shale, faulting and jointing both above and below the water. That does not make the formation boring. It makes it more interesting because it means the shape may be a visible record of the island's own physical history. There are also channels and narrow cuts that people have interpreted in different ways. Some observers have called them roads, drains, passageways, or processional routes. These descriptions are understandable in a loose visual sense. If a long, narrow depression runs across stone, especially near a flat surface, the mind searches for a purpose. Water channel, path, boundary, entrance, something with intention. Yet natural cracks can widen into channels. Faults can create lines of weakness. Currents can clear sediment from some gaps while leaving other places covered. A feature that looks like a path may simply be a fracture that has been opened, cleaned, and emphasized by water. The difficult part is that both explanations begin with the same visual fact. There is a line. One side says the line was used or shaped. The other says the line was made by geology. The line itself remains calm and unhelpful. The formation is not smooth in the way a carved monument would be after careful finishing. Photographs and dive accounts show roughness, breaks, marine growth, shadows, and surfaces that change depending on light and angle. Underwater, these details matter. A photograph taken in blue water can flatten textures. A shadow can sharpen a corner. A camera angle can make a slope look more vertical than it is, or make a natural fracture look like a cut block. The opposite can also happen. A real mark, if one existed, could be softened by algae, coral, sediment, or years of water movement. This is why judging the site only from dramatic images is tricky. A single photograph is a small piece of evidence with a strong personality. It can persuade before it explains. It can show one face of a stone and hide another. The seafloor is not a studio. It does not arrange itself for fair comparison. A helpful way to picture the monument is to imagine a huge piece of layered stone that has been broken and worn in sections, leaving some parts exposed like giant shelves. From one side, it may look like a stepped pyramid. From another, it may look more like a natural outcrop whose surfaces have been exaggerated by fractures. From above, certain angles may align in a way that feels almost planned. From close up, the layers and cracks may become more obvious. This shifting impression is one reason the site has held attention for so long. It refuses to look only one way. If it looked completely natural from every angle, the argument would have faded quickly. If it contained clear carved inscriptions, cut blocks, tool marks, or associated artifacts in secure positions, the argument would have moved in another direction. Instead, it sits in the middle, visually suggestive but not settled. There is a main face that divers often focus on, a broad side where the ledges and drops are especially noticeable. Some descriptions mention what appears to be a large platform near the top, then a series of descending levels. There are areas that look like walls, and there are angular blocks nearby that add to the impression of an arranged complex. Japan's official travel site openly reflects the uncertainty, saying the monument could be one of the wonders of the natural world or perhaps the remains of a lost civilization, while also noting that no one is quite sure what is down there. That is a careful way to put it. It allows the visitor to feel the mystery without pretending the mystery has already been solved. It is also much more relaxing than shouting Atlantis every 3 minutes, which is generally not recommended before sleep. The scale also changes the feeling of the place. A small angular rock might be curious but not world famous. A whole mass of stone with repeated ledges and broad faces feels different. Size gives the formation authority. It makes it harder to dismiss at a glance. When a diver moves along one side of it, the body experiences the structure not as a photograph but as a landscape. There is distance to cross. There are surfaces to pass. There is a sense of moving around something rather than simply looking at it. That physical experience may be part of why some divers come away convinced it is more than natural. The human body is good at reading environments. We know when a space feels enclosed, open, raised, or arranged. But the body can also be fooled, especially in water, where movement is slow, sound is altered, and the normal cues of land are missing. Underwater, even a natural rock face can feel like an entrance to somewhere. The surrounding environment adds to the effect. Yonaguni is known among divers, and the waters around the island can have powerful currents. The official tourism site warns that the monument lies in shallow waters, but that powerful currents mean divers need experience to explore it safely. This is not a quiet swimming pool with a mystery at the bottom, it is an active marine setting. Currents move around the formation, brushing past edges, clearing some surfaces and making others difficult to examine for long. That constant motion can sculpt, polish, expose and hide. It also means a diver may not linger where they want. The sea decides the pace. This is very rude of the sea, but it has never been known for taking appointments. Because the formation is underwater, the sense of up and down can become strangely loose. A ledge that would be impossible to climb on land can be explored by simply rising with a breath and a fin movement. A vertical wall becomes something you float beside rather than stand before. A terrace is no longer a floor because no one is walking. This changes how the shape is understood. Features that might seem impractical as the architecture on land may still appear architectural underwater because the viewer is no longer using them with a human body in the normal way. A stair that is too tall to climb can still look like a stair when you're weightless. A platform that leads nowhere can still look like a platform when you're drifting above it. Water removes function but leaves form, and form is enough to start an argument. Some claimed features are even more specific. Over the years, people have pointed to possible carvings, animal-like shapes, gates, roads, and other details. Britannica notes that supporters of the man-made interpretation have claimed straight lines, carvings, and nearby formations as part of the case for an ancient submerged city, while researchers on the natural side argue that the structure seems to be solid rock rather than assembled blocks, and that the alleged carvings may be natural scratches. This is a key difference. If the structure were made from separate stones moved into place, that would be one kind of evidence. If it is mostly connected to the underlying bedrock, that points more naturally toward a geological origin, or at least toward a natural base. A person can still modify bedrock, of course, but modification is different from full construction. It is the difference between carving a bench into a cliff and building a stone palace. Both are human activity, but they tell very different stories. Looking closely at the shape also means noticing what is missing. There are no widely accepted inscriptions that settle the matter. There is no agreed collection of artifacts showing an ancient settlement on the structure itself. There are no clear construction joints proving that blocks were quarried, carried, and placed. There is no neat line of columns waiting patiently for archaeologists to arrive with clipboards. What exists is a large formation with a strong visual resemblance to built space. That resemblance is the beginning of the mystery, not the end of it. It is enough to ask the question. It is not enough to answer it. This may sound strict, but it is actually what keeps the mystery honest. Without that discipline, every unusual rock becomes a ruined temple, every scratch becomes writing, and every fish becomes a suspicious witness who refuses to comment. At the same time, dismissing the shape too quickly would be a mistake. People are drawn to Yonaguni because the formation genuinely is unusual to look at. It is not silly to be struck by it. It is not foolish to feel that something about it seems organised. Even geologists who favour a natural explanation usually do not deny that it has a dramatic appearance. The more useful question is how often natural processes can create such appearances, and whether the local geology provides examples. Reports comparing the underwater site with rock formations on Yonaguni's coast point out that similar layering, jointing, and fracture patterns can be seen above water on the island. That comparison matters because it gives us a nearby natural laboratory. If the island's exposed cliffs and shore platforms show the same kinds of steps, cracks, and angular surfaces, then the underwater shape becomes less isolated. It may still be impressive, but it is no longer alone. This is where the shape on the seafloor begins to change in meaning. At first it looks like a possible object, a monument, a ruin, a structure. Then it becomes part of a landscape. It belongs to an island made of rock that has been lifted, cracked, weathered, and battered by water. The monument is not sitting in a blank space. It is part of a geological setting. That setting includes sedimentary layers, tectonic stress, erosion, marine action, and changes in sea level. These processes do not work like a sculptor with a chisel. They work unevenly, slowly and repeatedly. They exploit weakness. They break along lines. They remove softer material. They leave harder sections standing. Over long periods, the result can be surprisingly geometric, not perfect, not planned, but geometric enough to make the mind stop. There is a quiet lesson in that. We often think of nature as messy and human work as ordered, but the real world is less tidy. Nature can create order without intention. Crystals grow in regular forms. Basalt can cool into columns. Mud can crack into polygons. Rivers can carve terraces. Sandstone can split along plains. Coastlines can produce platforms and notches that look engineered if seen from the right angle. Human beings, meanwhile, often build things that become messy almost immediately. Anyone who has owned a drawer full of cables understands this. So the question is not simply whether Yonaguni looks orderly. It does. The question is whether its order is the kind that requires human hands, or the kind that emerges from rock structure and erosion. The most honest way to see the monument may be to allow both impressions to exist for a while. From a distance, it can look like a stepped construction. From a closer geological view, it can look like fractured bedrock. From a diver's perspective, it can feel like moving through the remains of something. From an archaeologist's perspective, it lacks the kind of evidence needed to call it a confirmed human-made site. From a storyteller's perspective, it is almost too tempting. It has the right location, the right darkness, the right shape, and the right amount of doubt. If mysteries had audition rooms, Yonaguni would walk in and immediately get the part. Yet the stone itself is not performing. It is simply there. The flat areas do not know they resemble platforms. The ledges do not know they resemble steps. The channels do not know they have been called roads. Fish pass over them with no concern for archaeological classification. Currents slide along the faces whether humans call them walls or bedding planes. That indifference is part of what makes the place calming to think about. Human arguments rise and fall above the surface, but below, the structure remains slow, heavy, and patient. So, when we picture the shape on the seafloor, we should picture something large enough to impress, angular enough to puzzle, and ambiguous enough to resist an easy label. It is not a neat underwater city with streets, houses, and doorways waiting to be dusted off. It is also not just any ordinary rock that people made famous for no reason. It is a formation whose shape sits exactly at the uncomfortable meeting point between pattern and proof. That is why it has lasted in public imagination. Not because it clearly answers a question, but because it keeps asking one. And once the eye has adjusted to its ledges and faces, another thought begins to surface. The shape alone is not the whole story. A mystery like this also depends on the moment someone first noticed it, the conditions of the dive, the way the discovery was described, and how quickly a strange object under the sea can become a debate on land. The stone may have been there for thousands of years, but the story of the monument, the human story around it, began much more recently, with a diver in the waters off Yonaguni who saw something on the seafloor that did not look easy to explain. The human story of this underwater structure begins not with a team of archaeologists, not with a government expedition, and not with a dramatic map marked in red ink. It begins with a diver doing something far more ordinary, and in a way, far more believable. He was exploring the waters off the south shore of Yonaguni Island in 1986, a place already tied closely to diving, marine life, and the sea. The diver was Kihachiro Aratake, a local diving tour operator, and according to the Japan National Tourism Organization, his exploration that year led to the startling discovery that later became known as the Yonaguni Underwater Monument. That detail matters. Discoveries like this often become wrapped in drama after the fact. Once a place becomes famous, people imagine the moment of discovery as if it came with thunder, a swelling orchestra, and someone whispering, "We have found what was lost." Real life is usually less tidy. A diver goes into the water. Visibility is good enough. The current allows a route. A shape appears where a shape was not expected. At first, it is simply something strange on the seabed. The mind does not instantly know what category to place it in. It is not quite reef, not quite cliff, not quite ruin. So it sits there in that uncomfortable little space between recognition and confusion, which is exactly where many good mysteries begin. Yonaguni itself helps set the scene. It is remote, sitting at the far western edge of Japan's inhabited islands, with Taiwan much closer than the large cities most people picture when they think of Japan. The official tourism page describes it as the most remote of the inhabited Okinawan islands, reached by flights from Ishigaki and Naha, or by a ferry from Ishigaki that can be rough and take several hours. That remoteness gives the discovery a certain practical texture. This was not a hidden stone shape beneath the water beside a crowded beach where thousands of people would have noticed it while dropping sunglasses. It was in a place where the sea is part of daily life. But the underwater landscape still had corners that were not fully familiar, and the sea around Yonaguni is not passive. It is clear at times, but it can be strong. The same official tourism material warns that, although the monument lies in shallow water, the currents can be powerful enough that divers need experience to explore the site safely. That gives the discovery another layer. When we imagine finding something underwater, we might picture a peaceful descent into perfect blue silence, as if the ocean has kindly arranged the lighting and paused all movement for our convenience. The actual ocean is much less interested in our convenience. It moves, it pulls, it shifts the diver's body, limits time, changes visibility, and turns observation into a negotiation. The sea does not say, "Take as long as you need." It says, more or less, "You may look, but keep your fins on." Arataki was not entering an empty blue world. He was part of a diving culture around Yonaguni, a place known for marine life, including hammerhead sharks and manta rays, which the tourism page lists among the region's attractions. Divers often go looking for living things: a school of fish, a shark moving through open water, a manta passing with slow, impossible grace. Stone is usually the background. Stone is what you swim over on the way to the main event. So there is something quietly funny about this discovery. The ocean may have been expected to offer animals, motion, fins, teeth, and perhaps a good story for tourists. Instead, it offered a giant geometric puzzle, which is less likely to swim away but far more likely to cause arguments for 40 years. Picture the dive without making it too cinematic. A boat above, equipment checked. A descent into water that may be clear enough to see the shape begin forming below. The diver moves along the seabed or along a slope, expecting reef, rock, and marine life. Then the outline appears. At first, perhaps a wall, then a broad face, then something like a terrace, then another drop beneath it. The brain starts making comparisons before the diver has time to stop it. That looks like a step. That looks like an edge. That looks too straight. Divers are trained to observe carefully, but they are still human, and humans are pattern-making animals. We notice order quickly, especially when it appears in a place where we expected roughness. The first sight must have been disorienting. On land, if you come across a stone terrace, you can walk around it, touch it, compare it with nearby rock, and look for tool marks or debris. Underwater, even noticing is an effort. A diver has limited air, limited time, and a body that is floating rather than standing. The water moves between the eyes and the object. Shadows shift. The scale is not always obvious. A ledge may look smaller or larger depending on distance and visibility. Yet the formation was clearly unusual enough to make Arataki return to it and bring attention to it. Scuba Diving magazine, writing about a later dive at the site, notes that the monument has been considered mysterious since it was discovered by Kihachiro Aratake, owner of the Sioux West Dive Center, in 1986. There is a small but important stage between seeing something strange and telling the world about it. At first, a discovery is personal. It belongs to the person who saw it, and perhaps to a small circle of people who hear the story soon after. The diver returns to shore, equipment is removed, wet gear is hung somewhere. The ordinary world comes back in. Boats, voices, weather, food, schedules, the practical details of running a dive operation. But the image does not leave. A flat stone surface underwater. A hard angle. Terraces too big to ignore. Something that looked almost planned. It must have been difficult not to describe it. It must also have been difficult to describe it without sounding as if the sea had played a trick. This is one of the problems with first reports of strange places. Language arrives too quickly. The moment someone says ruin, the listener imagines builders. The moment someone says pyramid, the listener imagines ancient engineering. The moment someone says monument, the stone becomes an object with meaning, even before meaning has been proven. That is why naming matters. The formation became widely known as the Yonaguni Monument, or sometimes as underwater ruins. Those names are powerful. They're also not neutral. A geologist might prefer submarine topography or underwater rock formation, which sounds much less exciting but maybe more cautious. A tourism brochure may lean toward mystery, because mystery is easier to sell than sedimentary bedding planes. Although, to be fair, sedimentary bedding planes have probably never been given a proper marketing budget. Once the site was known, people began to come and look. Divers visited, researchers visited, writers visited. The argument widened. Britannica describes the Yonaguni Monument as an underwater rock structure discovered in the mid-1980s near Yonaguni Island, and it summarises the central disagreement in simple terms. Some interpret the ziggurat-like formation as connected to an ancient city, while others argue that it was naturally created. That disagreement did not appear out of nowhere. It began because the discovery was visual before it was analytical. People saw a shape that looked meaningful. Then they tried to explain why it looked that way. The early attention included the work of Masaki Kimura, a professor from the University of the Ryukyus, who became one of the most prominent voices arguing that the site showed signs of human involvement. Later descriptions of the debate often return to his claims because he did not merely say the formation looked interesting. He proposed that it could represent an ancient man-made or modified structure, possibly linked with a submerged settlement. Britannica notes that supporters of the ancient city idea have pointed to straight lines, alleged carvings, and nearby formations, while skeptics argue that the structure appears to be solid rock and that the supposed carvings may be natural scratches. So, from the beginning, the discovery did not become one mystery but two. First, what was the physical shape? Second, what kind of evidence would be enough to explain it? That second question is the one that gives the story its staying power. If Aratake had found a clearly carved statue, a shipwreck, or a set of pottery fragments embedded in a sealed layer, the story would have moved into archaeology very quickly. If he'd found a normal reef wall with no unusual geometry, no one would be making videos about it decades later. Instead, he found a structure that looked suggestive but not conclusive. The evidence was not empty, but it was not decisive either. It had the exact amount of uncertainty required to keep people returning to it. The site's appearance helped spread the story, because underwater images are unusually persuasive. A photograph of Yonaguni does not feel like an explanation. It feels like an invitation to choose a side. One image may show a terrace that looks almost cut. Another may show a passage-like opening. Another may show ledges dropping in a way that resembles a gigantic staircase. Scuba Diving magazine's account of visiting the site describes narrow passageways, straight-looking steps, terraces, angled corners, holes, channels, and shaped rocks, while also noting that doubt set in and that natural explanations remain part of the debate. That is very close to how many people experience the sight. First amazement, then certainty, then doubt, then amazement again. Then perhaps a quiet desire for a cup of tea and a geologist with a waterproof clipboard. In that sense, the discovery did not happen all at once. Arataki found the formation in 1986, yes. But the public discovery unfolded over years as the site was photographed, mapped, dived, described, debated, and renamed in people's imaginations. A discovery is not only the first moment something is seen, it is also the long process by which a thing becomes known, misunderstood, studied, argued over, and folded into culture. The seafloor structure had been there long before any diver arrived. What changed in 1986 was not the stone. What changed was human attention. Human attention can be a strange instrument. It magnifies some details and ignores others. It can turn a rock face into a possible temple, or turn a possible human mark into just a scratch, depending on who is looking. After the discovery, the site attracted people with different training and different expectations. Divers saw a dramatic place to move through. Geologists saw rock layers, fractures, erosion, and tectonic history. Archaeology-minded observers looked for signs of modification. Tourists saw a mystery worth visiting. Television producers saw something that could support slow, underwater camera shots and serious narration. The same formation served all of them in different ways, which is very generous for a rock that never asked to be famous. There is another reason the discovery spread. It arrived in a world already prepared for underwater mysteries. Humans have long imagined lost lands beneath the sea. Atlantis, Mu, Lemuria, sunken cities, drowned temples, entire worlds supposedly swallowed by water. Most of these stories are not supported as history, but they remain powerful because they fit a real fact. The sea has covered former landscapes. After the last ice age, sea levels rose and flooded coastal areas around the world. So when a large stepped formation is found underwater, especially near an island, the imagination has somewhere to go. It drains the water away and asks what might have stood there before. That does not prove a civilization built Yonaguni. It only explains why the story found such a ready audience. The location made that audience even more receptive. The Ryukyu Islands sit in a region shaped by ocean movement, earthquakes, shifting shorelines, and long human connections across water. A mysterious seafloor form near Yonaguni did not feel completely out of place as a subject of speculation. It was remote enough to feel hidden, but accessible enough for divers. It was large enough to impress, but ambiguous enough to debate. It was underwater, which automatically gives any object a sense of secrecy, even if the object is simply minding its own business under several meters of seawater. The first dives after discovery must have been partly practical and partly emotional. A diver who has seen something unusual wants to return, not only to show others, but to check whether memory has exaggerated it. The mind can enlarge things after the event. It can sharpen edges, deepen shadows, and turn uncertainty into a stronger image. Returning to the site is a way of asking the sea to confirm or correct the memory, and in Yonaguni's case, the formation did not become ordinary on second viewing. If anything, repeated dives gave people more details to discuss. The more they looked, the more features seemed worth naming. This naming process is common at unusual sites. A large flat area becomes the terrace. A narrow opening becomes the tunnel. A shaped stone becomes the turtle. A pair of holes becomes eyes. These names help divers communicate, and they make navigation easier. They also shape interpretation. Once a feature is called a turtle, it becomes difficult to look at it without seeing a turtle. Once a channel is called a road, the mind places feet on it, even if no feet ever walked there. This does not mean naming is dishonest. It is simply how people manage complicated spaces. But at a disputed site, names can quietly push the imagination in one direction. Arataki's discovery also came before the internet became what it is now, which meant the mystery spread at a different pace. It moved through dive communities, books, articles, television, photographs, and later online discussions. By the time many people first encountered it, the site was already carrying layers of interpretation. Few people saw a neutral rock formation first. They saw the mysterious underwater monument no one can explain. That phrase is compelling, but it arrives with a mood attached. It tells the viewer to expect impossibility, and once expectation is in the room, even a natural fracture can look as if it has something to confess. Still, the original discovery remains wonderfully simple. A local diver found something he did not expect. That simplicity is important because it keeps the story grounded. Many false mysteries begin with vague rumours, missing documents, or someone's cousin who knew a fisherman who saw something glowing under the waves in 1974. Yonaguni is different. The site exists. Divers visit it. Official tourism material directs experienced divers there. Britannica summarises the dispute. Scuba diving writers have described swimming through it. The disagreement is not about whether there is a formation. The disagreement is about what kind of formation it is. That makes the discovery more interesting, not less. It means we are not chasing a phantom. We're dealing with a real object whose meaning remains unsettled. A real thing can be measured, photographed, visited, compared, and criticised. It can disappoint wild theories and still remain strange. It can be natural and still impressive. It can lack proof of construction and still deserve careful study. This is where the best kind of mystery lives, not in refusing evidence, but in staying close enough to evidence that the unanswered parts become sharper. The discovery also reminds us how much of the world is found by people looking for something else. Fossils are found during construction. Ancient settlements are found under fields. Shipwrecks are found by fishermen. Caves are found when someone notices a cold draft. And off Yonaguni, a large underwater formation entered public attention because a diver went into the water and looked closely. There is comfort in that. It means discovery is not always a grand expedition. Sometimes it is a shift in attention. Sometimes it is simply being present in the right place, with enough curiosity to notice that the seabed has become strange. After Arataki's first encounter, the stone structure began its second life, not as rock alone, but as a question. People came to it with measuring lines, cameras, notebooks, theories and expectations. Some returned convinced that it could not be natural. Others returned convinced that nature had done the work without human help. Many probably left somewhere in between, which may be the most honest place to stand after meeting a giant stepped formation underwater, while a current tries to remove your mask. And so the discovery was not only the moment a diver saw stone beneath the sea, it was the moment the stone entered human argument. Before that, it belonged to currents, fish, sediment and time. After that, it belonged also to divers, scientists, documentary makers, skeptics, believers, and anyone who has ever looked at a photograph of its terraces and felt the small, stubborn pause of uncertainty. That pause is important. It is the beginning of investigation. It is what keeps us from turning away too quickly. It is also what keeps us from deciding too quickly. From here, the story naturally moves from the act of finding to the harder act of judging. A diver can discover a shape. Photographs can spread it. A name can make it famous. But the real difficulty begins when people try to decide whether those flat surfaces, straight lines, ledges and channels are the work of hands, the work of water, or something more complicated sitting quietly between the two. Now the real difficulty begins, because finding a shape under the sea is one thing, but deciding what kind of shape it is can be far harder. A diver can point to a ledge and say, "Look at that." A photograph can show a broad, flat surface. A video can pass slowly along a sharp corner, but the question underneath all of it remains stubbornly in place. Are we looking at stone shaped only by nature, a trick of shadow and expectation, or something that human hands once touched? This is where the Yonaguni Monument becomes more than an underwater curiosity. It becomes a test of how we think, because the formation does not give us a simple answer. It does not look completely random, but it also does not come with the clear signs archaeologists usually need before calling something a built structure. Britannica describes the site as an underwater rock structure discovered near Yonaguni Island in the mid-1980s, with some people interpreting its stepped shape as the remains of an ancient city, while others argue that it is naturally formed. That is the whole mystery in a small sentence. Two groups are looking at the same stone, the same terraces, the same edges, and they are not seeing the same story. The first thing to understand is why the human-made idea feels so tempting. The monument has large flat areas. It has straight-looking lines. It has sharp drops, step-like levels, and corners that seem too clean for something made by waves and broken rock. In ordinary life, those features usually mean construction. A flat platform suggests people wanted a place to stand. A wall suggests people wanted a boundary. A stair suggests people needed to move from one level to another. The mind is not being silly when it makes those connections. It is doing what it has learned from the built world. Houses, temples, roads, harbours, terraces, and tombs all train us to see geometry as intention. So when divers move around Yonaguni and see what appears to be alongside a broad upper surface and descending ledges, the idea of design arrives quickly. It is not hard to imagine the sea removed and the stone exposed in sunlight. Suddenly the structure becomes a great platform near the coast. Perhaps people gathered there. Perhaps it marked a sacred place. Perhaps it stood beside an older shoreline before sea levels and land movements changed the scene. These thoughts are not difficult to form. In fact, they form almost too easily. The brain takes a shape, adds people, adds purpose, adds a lost past, and before long, a silent rock has become the centre of an ancient drama. But science has to move more slowly than imagination. It has to ask what the rock is made of, how it breaks, how the surrounding island formed, what the local currents do, and whether the site contains evidence that cannot be explained by natural processes. The natural explanation begins with the material itself. The formation is often described as being made of sandstone and mudstone connected to the underlying rock, rather than separate blocks stacked together like masonry. That is important, because a built monument usually leaves signs of construction. Blocks may be cut, transported, fitted, or arranged. There may be joints between pieces. There may be tool marks. There may be rubble from shaping, or nearby artifacts from the people who worked there. A natural outcrop, on the other hand, is part of the bedrock. It can still look dramatic, but it grew from geology rather than from labour. This does not mean humans could never have modified bedrock. They certainly could. Around the world, people have carved steps, shrines, channels, tombs and platforms directly into rock. A structure does not need to be made of separate blocks to be human-altered, but if someone claims modification, the evidence needs to show it clearly. There should be marks that behave like toolwork rather than cracks, scratches or erosion. There should be shapes that make sense as repeated human action, not just isolated suggestive details. There should ideally be archaeological context, artifacts, datable material, settlement evidence, or some connection to known human activity. Without that, the argument rests heavily on appearance, and appearance, especially underwater, is a slippery guide. One of the most important natural processes in the Yonaguni debate is jointing. In geology, a joint is a natural fracture in rock. Joints can occur in sets, and those sets can be parallel, evenly spaced, and sometimes intersect with other sets at strong angles. They also guide erosion, because water and weather often attack cracks first. Geological descriptions of jointing note that these fractures are common in many rock types and can strongly control how landscapes develop through weathering and erosion. That sounds plain, but it matters greatly here. If a rock body has horizontal bedding planes and vertical joints, pieces may break away in flat surfaces and sharp faces. The result can look very much like steps, terraces, and walls. Think of a layered cake. If the cake were made of stone, sat near an active island, and was treated very badly by the ocean for a long period of time, the layers give it horizontal weakness. Cracks give it vertical weakness. Water gets into those weaknesses. Pressure, earthquakes, currents, and erosion keep working. Softer parts wear down faster. Harder parts remain. Large pieces may detach. Edges may sharpen as loose material is swept away. Nobody needs to carve a stair. The rock may already contain the instructions for breaking into stair-like forms. Nature is not planning anything, but it is very good at following weakness. This is why some geologists have argued that Yonaguni's appearance is unusual but not impossible. Robert Schoch, a geologist who examined the site, has argued that the formation is most likely natural. His explanation focuses on the sandstone's bedding planes and vertical joints, which can create rectangular-looking forms, and he has pointed to similar formations on land around Yonaguni. That comparison is useful because it moves the debate away from a single strange object. If similar step-like angular shapes appear on the island above water, where no one claims an ancient builder shaped every ledge, then the underwater formation may be part of the same geological pattern. Still, there is a reason the human-made interpretation has not simply disappeared. The site's concentration of features feels striking. A single flat plane can be natural, a single right angle can be natural, a single channel can be natural. But when many of these appear close together, people begin to ask whether coincidence is being stretched too far. Supporters of human involvement have pointed to straight lines, possible carvings, and nearby formations as part of their case, while critics reply that these features can be explained as natural cracks, scratches, and platforms. This is the heart of the disagreement. One side sees a pattern too organised to ignore. The other side sees natural geology doing what natural geology often does, but in a very photogenic way. The word shadow matters here as much as stone. Underwater, shadow can change everything. Light does not behave in the sea the way it behaves on land. It bends, scatters, fades, and loses colour with depth. A surface seen in blue light may appear smoother than it is. A crack may look deeper. An edge may look sharper. A slope may look like a wall if filmed from the right angle. A photograph can make a feature look more regular by hiding roughness outside the frame. A video can make a swim-through feel like a passageway, simply because the diver's movement gives it direction. None of this means the images are false, it only means they are incomplete. This is a common problem with underwater sites. The viewer on land often sees the monument through selected images. The strongest angles are shared most often, because they are the most impressive. A flat terrace with a hard drop is more interesting than a messy patch of broken stone nearby. A straight-looking ledge becomes famous. A confusing area with no clear form is left out. Over time, the public image of the site becomes more orderly than the full site may be. The mystery becomes polished by repetition. We see the best evidence for strangeness again and again, and the ordinary parts fall away like sand from a boot. There is also the mind's habit of completing shapes. If a line is almost straight, we may remember it as straight. If two cracks almost meet at a right angle, we may describe the corner as square. If a rough channel runs across a surface, we may imagine it as a road. This is not dishonesty. It is perception doing its usual editing. The brain likes clean forms. It saves effort by turning messy input into familiar objects. That is helpful when recognizing a chair in a dark room. It is less helpful when deciding whether an underwater rock is a prehistoric monument. The more careful question is not, does it look built? It does, from some angles. The better question is, what would we expect to find if it were built? If an ancient group had shaped a large stone complex, there should be some signs of repeated work. Tool marks might show a regular directional pattern. Cut surfaces might differ from naturally broken surfaces. Removed material might be present somewhere nearby, unless currents carried it away. There might be traces of use, such as artifacts, carvings that are clear rather than suggestive, or surrounding cultural material. If the site was part of a settlement, there might be pottery, foundations, hearths, anchors, or other remains in the area. Archaeologists do not need every piece of evidence at once, but they need something that clearly crosses the line from possible to probable. At Yonaguni, that clear line has been difficult to find. Many claimed carvings or marks remain disputed. Some appear to be natural scratches, others are too ambiguous to carry much weight. The supposed roads and channels may follow cracks in the stone. The platforms may be bedding planes. The walls may be exposed faces of bedrock. This does not prove that no human ever noticed or used the formation when parts of it were above water. That is a separate possibility. A natural rock platform can become meaningful to people without being built by them. People may gather on natural cliffs, use caves, mark stones, or adapt landscapes that were already impressive. But using a natural place is not the same as constructing it. That middle possibility is worth holding on to for a while. It is often skipped because it is less dramatic. People prefer clean categories, built or natural, civilization or coincidence, ruin or rock. But real landscapes are not always clean. A formation could be natural in origin and still have been touched by people. A shoreline could contain natural terraces that were used as lookout points, fishing places, ritual spaces, or temporary shelters. A crack could be widened. A flat area could be cleared. A stone could be marked. Later, if the sea rose or the land shifted, those subtle human traces would become much harder to recognize. Underwater erosion, marine growth, and strong currents could blur the evidence. So the most reasonable mystery may not be whether the entire monument was built from scratch, but whether any part of it shows reliable signs of modification or use. Even then, the burden of proof remains heavy. Human beings have lived near coasts for a long time, and many ancient coastal sites are now underwater. That fact makes submerged archaeology important, but it does not turn every underwater platform into a settlement. Rising sea levels after the last ice age covered many former shorelines, so archaeologists look for drowned landscapes all over the world. But real submerged sites usually become convincing because they contain more than suggestive shapes. They contain patterns of occupation, datable materials, tools, or constructed features that hold up under close study. In a genuine harbour, for example, one might find anchors, walls, pottery, cargo remains, or clear building methods. In a drowned settlement, one might find house foundations, streets, hearths, and everyday objects. These things make a human story harder to dismiss. Yonaguni has not provided that level of accepted archaeological evidence. That is one reason many researchers remain cautious or sceptical. The site is famous because of its shape, not because of a strong collection of artifacts. That can feel disappointing at first. It would be much more exciting if a diver had found a sealed chamber, a carved inscription, or an ancient teapot still waiting on a stone shelf. Though after thousands of years underwater, the tea would almost certainly be beyond saving. Instead, we have geometry, geology, and debate. That may sound smaller, but it is actually a useful lesson in how mysteries work. The first thing that catches attention is rarely the same thing that proves the answer. Stone can imitate structure because stone is not random in the way people often imagine. Rock has layers, it has stress, it has weaknesses, it responds to earthquakes, pressure, weather, waves, and time. It can fracture into blocks, it can create cliffs that look cut, it can form benches along shorelines where waves attack the same level repeatedly. It can produce flat wave-cut platforms. It can split into slabs. It can be cleaned by currents until the underlying geometry becomes more visible. The sea does not make a monument in one day. It works by repetition. Push, pull, grind, lift, drop, wear away, expose. It does this for so long that human patience looks very small beside it. But human builders also use the shapes nature gives them. Many ancient monuments are not made in empty spaces. They are carved from cliffs, built on hills, aligned with natural ridges, or arranged around existing rock. So when people say Yonaguni looks built, the more careful version of that thought might be, it looks like a natural formation that a human group might have found interesting. That is a softer claim, but it is also harder to dismiss. People have always been drawn to unusual places. A great stone terrace by the sea would not need to be fully artificial to matter. It could become a landmark simply by being there. The problem is that this softer possibility leaves fewer obvious traces. If people only visited the site, stood on it, fished near it, or regarded it as important without building much, the evidence might be slight. If thousands of years of water movement later covered or removed those traces, certainty becomes even more difficult. This is why the argument can feel circular. The natural side says there is no clear evidence of human work. The human involvement side says the evidence may have been erased or is difficult to see underwater. Both statements can sound reasonable, but science cannot accept invisible evidence as proof. It can only say, maybe, but show us something we can test. That need for testable evidence is not a way of killing wonder. It is a way of protecting it. Without evidence, wonder becomes whatever we want it to be. With evidence, wonder becomes attached to the real world. It gains weight. If Yonaguni is natural, it is still a remarkable demonstration of how ordinary processes can create extraordinary forms. If it is modified, even slightly, it could tell us something valuable about ancient people and vanished coastlines. If it is entirely built, which would require much stronger evidence than currently accepted, then it would be a major archaeological discovery. Each possibility is interesting, but they are not equally supported. The shadows on the site also remind us that mystery often lives in partial seeing. A diva sees a face of stone for a limited time. A camera sees only its frame. A researcher sees data from one visit, one map, one measurement, one interpretation. The ocean prevents easy inspection. Strong currents can make careful work difficult. Marine life grows over surfaces. Sediment moves. Visibility changes. Even if the formation were on land, the debate would be easier to manage. Underwater, every claim must pass through a moving layer of difficulty. The sea is not hiding the truth on purpose. It is simply being the sea, which is often inconvenient enough. It is also worth noticing how emotion enters the debate. The human-made idea is emotionally powerful because it suggests loss. It suggests that something once stood in air and light, known to people before the water covered it. It gives the structure a past filled with voices, footsteps, and purpose. The natural explanation can feel colder at first, because it removes people from the centre, but it has its own quiet strength. It says that the earth can produce forms that fool us, challenge us, and make us think more carefully. It says that not every wonder needs a builder. Sometimes the builder is pressure, fracture, sea level, and time. Neither reaction should be mocked too quickly. Wanting the site to be human-made is not only about fantasy. It comes from a real fascination with lost coastal history. Being skeptical is not only about shutting down mystery. It comes from the need to separate evidence from desire. The best way to approach Yonaguni is not with ridicule, but with patience. Let the shape be impressive. Let the natural processes be powerful. Let the human imagination do its work, but do not let it drive the boat alone. The boat should have at least one geologist aboard, and preferably someone who remembered snacks. So, stone, shadow, or something built? The honest answer is that the strongest accepted evidence points towards stone, a natural rock formation shaped by bedding, joints, erosion, and currents. The shadow part explains why it can look so convincing from certain views. The something built part remains the claim that keeps the story alive, but it needs stronger evidence than resemblance. That does not make the formation less worth exploring. It may make it more worth exploring, because it forces us to practice a rare kind of curiosity, the kind that can be interested without being certain. As the diver's lamp moves across those terraces, the question does not vanish. It becomes more precise. Not just, could humans have made this, but which marks are natural, which are ambiguous, which could be tested. What does the island's geology show above water? What did sea level do in this region? What evidence would settle the matter? The mystery becomes less like a locked door and more like a long stone surface with many cracks. Some cracks lead nowhere. Some reveal the structure of the rock. Some may still deserve a closer look. And while the debate continues, on land, the ocean keeps doing what it has always done. It moves over the edges. It clears sand from some places and lays it down in others. It softens certain surfaces and exposes new ones. It turns a hard stone mass into a changing visual puzzle, one that can look like architecture in the morning light and geology in the afternoon current. To understand why that happens, we need to give the ocean more credit, because water is not just the curtain covering the sight. It may be one of the main sculptors of the entire scene. The ocean is not simply covering the Yonaguni Formation, it is changing how we see it. That may sound like a small point at first, but it matters a great deal because water does not behave like a clear sheet of glass laid politely over an object. Water moves, bends light, carries sand, feeds marine life, hides edges, reveals other edges, and slowly changes the surfaces it touches. It can make a natural rock look sharper than it is, or make a worked surface look older and rougher than it once was. It can erase small clues and exaggerate large shapes. It can turn certainty into hesitation, which is very inconvenient for humans, because humans do like a tidy answer before bedtime. To understand why this underwater structure is so difficult to judge, we have to give the sea an active role. The ocean is not just the setting, it is part of the evidence, it is part of the confusion. It is the long, patient editor of the scene. If the formation was always natural, the ocean helped shape how dramatic it appears today. If people ever modified it, the ocean has spent thousands of years softening, scratching, covering and rearranging the traces. Either way, what a diver sees now is not necessarily what the formation looked like in the past. It is the current version, after a very long conversation between stone and water. Start with the simplest thing the ocean does. It moves. Currents near Yonaguni can be strong, and strong water does not simply pass over rock without effect. It pushes against exposed faces. It drags sand and small particles along surfaces. It swirls around corners. It clears sediment from some places and leaves it in others. Over long periods, this can make a shape look more intentional than it would in still conditions. A current may sweep one ledge clean while a nearby crack remains filled with sand. It may expose a flat bedding plane and leave the rougher broken material below in shadow. It may make a line of weakness stand out, as if someone had drawn it with care. The sea is not trying to fool anyone, it is only doing what moving water does, but the result can be very persuasive. Think of a stone step on an old coastal path. Even without tools, waves can undercut it, smooth it, and leave a neat edge where softer material has gone. If the rock has natural layers, the waves may remove one layer and leave the layer above projecting like a shelf. If there are cracks, water enters them again and again, widening them slowly. A crack becomes a gap becomes a channel becomes, to the imagination, a path. And once the word path arrives, the mind starts adding feet, sandals, a destination, perhaps a person carrying a basket because the mind is very helpful in exactly the wrong way. At Yonaguni, many of the features people find striking are the same features water tends to emphasize. Flat areas, straight cracks, sharp ledges, exposed bedding surfaces, drop-offs where blocks may have broken away. The ocean cleans some of these surfaces and darkens others. It makes the largest shapes visible while removing smaller context. On land, you might see weathered slopes, loose fragments, soil, plant roots, and nearby cliffs that help explain the formation. Underwater, those ordinary clues may be hidden or absent. The structure appears more isolated, more dramatic, almost staged. It rises from blue water as if placed there for inspection. That feeling can be powerful, even when the cause is natural. Light adds another layer of disguise. Underwater light is not the light we know on land. It fades with depth, and colours vanish unevenly. Red goes quickly, then orange and yellow weaken. Blue remains longer, giving everything that dim underwater cast, as if the world has been wrapped in cool glass. Shadows become important. A small overhang can look deeper. A rough edge can look sharper. A tilted face may seem vertical. A natural crack may look like a carved line if the light catches it from one side. A diver's lamp can make this even more dramatic because it creates a bright circle surrounded by darkness. Inside that circle, a corner might look clean and deliberate. Outside it, the messy continuation of the rock may disappear into blue shadow, quietly ruining the argument but not appearing in the photograph. This is why underwater photographs are both useful and dangerous. They let people see a place they may never visit, but they do not show everything. A camera frame chooses. It selects one angle, one distance, one lighting condition, one moment of visibility. A photograph of a terrace at Yonaguni can be striking because it shows the feature at its most ordered. But a formation is not one photograph. It is a whole physical place, with awkward surfaces, broken areas, uneven details, and features that do not fit easily into a dramatic caption. If we only see the strongest images, the structure can become more monument-like in our minds than it may feel during a careful survey. This happens with many famous places. The best angle becomes the place. The other angles are treated as background, even when they matter. The ocean also covers surfaces with life. Marine growth is not decoration. It is another form of disguise. Algae, corals, sponges, encrusting organisms and small creatures can attach to stone and change its appearance. They can hide fine marks. They can soften edges. They can fill small holes or make ordinary roughness look patterned. They can create texture where there was once a clean surface. If someone hoped to identify tool marks or carving lines, marine growth would be a problem. A shallow scratch could vanish beneath a living crust. A natural scratch could be made more mysterious by partial covering. A surface may look ancient and worked simply because it has been lived on by the sea for a long time. The fish, of course, are not helping. They pass by with the calm expression of creatures who know the answer, but have chosen silence. Sediment complicates things further. Sand and small fragments do not stay where we want them. They shift with storms, currents, and seasonal changes. Crack may be filled one year and open the next. A surface may be buried under a thin layer of sand during one dive and exposed during another. Small artifacts, if any ever existed there, could be moved, buried, broken, or carried away. That is one reason underwater archaeology is so difficult. Context matters in archaeology. Where something is found, what layer it comes from, what lies around it, and whether it has been disturbed are all part of the evidence. In a strong marine environment, context can be damaged. The ocean is very bad at preserving paperwork. There is also the slow work of abrasion. Sand carried by water can act like fine grinding material. Over time, it can smooth sharp surfaces or polish exposed rock. But abrasion does not affect every surface equally. A face exposed to current may become cleaner and more defined, while a sheltered surface remains rough. This uneven treatment can make the formation appear more designed. Some edges may look cut because they have been naturally cleaned. Others may look unfinished because they were protected. The difference may suggest stages of human work, when it may actually reflect stages of exposure. Chemical weathering plays its part as well. Seawater is not just water. It contains salts, dissolved gases, minerals, and living processes that interact with rock. Depending on the stone, seawater can weaken certain minerals, widen tiny openings, and encourage surface changes. Over long periods, even hard rock is not left untouched. The changes may be subtle, but subtle is enough when people are trying to decide whether a mark is a tool cut or a natural line. The difference between proof and possibility can be smaller than a fingertip. The ocean has many thousands of years to blur that difference. Then there is the matter of sea level. The Yonaguni Formation lies underwater now, but the world has not always had the same coastlines. During the last ice age, when much more water was locked in ice sheets, global sea levels were lower. Areas that are now underwater were once exposed land or shallow coast. As the climate warmed and ice melted, the sea rose and flooded large parts of the world's continental shelves and island margins. This is not speculation. It is a major part of Earth's recent history. It is one reason archaeologists take submerged landscapes seriously. Many places where ancient people could have lived, walked, hunted, gathered, fished, or built are now below the waves. That fact gives Yonaguni's mystery a real background. It is not impossible that humans once knew parts of the landscape now underwater. People have lived near coasts for a very long time, and coastlines have moved. A natural platform above the water could have been seen, used, named, or even modified before being submerged. But sea level change does not prove that the formation was built. It only makes the question reasonable enough to examine. A lower sea level can place a rock in reach of humans. It cannot by itself place a chisel in anyone's hand. If the formation was once above water or partly exposed, it would also have faced weathering from rain, wind, sunlight, and temperature changes before the ocean covered it. This matters because land weathering and marine weathering leave different kinds of marks. A surface shaped above water might later be altered underwater, creating a mixed appearance. It could have cracks from exposure, erosion from waves, marine growth from submersion, and fresh breaks from later movement. Trying to read that history is like trying to understand a book that has been left outside in the rain, dropped in the sea, dried in the sun, and then handed to a committee with very strong opinions. The island's tectonic setting adds even more complexity. This region is geologically active. Earthquakes, uplift, subsidence, faulting, and fractures can all affect rock formations. A block of stone does not need to be carved to become angular. It can be broken, it can be lifted, it can be tilted, it can be sliced by joints. When those fractures intersect bedding layers, they can produce the kind of stepped shapes that look strangely architectural. Later, waves and currents can remove the broken material and leave the strongest faces behind. The result may appear too orderly at first glance, but it may be the visible outcome of several natural processes working together. One mistake people often make is to imagine natural processes as soft and rounded. We picture water smoothing pebbles, wind making dunes, rain wearing hills into gentle slopes. But nature also makes sharp forms. Ice cracks rock apart. Basalt cools into columns, dried mud forms neat polygons, crystals grow in regular shapes, cliffs fracture into blocks, shorelines develop benches, notches and terraces. Nature does not use intention, but it uses rules. Those rules can produce order, not always perfect order. Not the kind of order that comes from a measuring tape and a tired builder muttering about deadlines, but enough order to make the eye stop and wonder. At the same time, the ocean can hide evidence that might have helped one side or the other. Suppose, only for the sake of careful thought, that ancient people did shape a small portion of the formation. The ocean could have removed loose debris, covered tool marks, broken off modified edges, or scattered small objects. Suppose instead that the formation is completely natural. The ocean could still emphasize its most artificial-looking surfaces and make natural cracks look like cuts. In both cases, the water makes judgment harder. It does not choose a theory. It makes all theories more difficult to prove. This is why some mysteries under the sea last longer than mysteries on land. On land, the environment may still damage evidence. but researchers can usually spend more time with the site. They can dig, map, measure, return easily, compare layers, and protect areas under study. Underwater, everything is more demanding. Equipment limits time, weather and currents limit access, visibility changes, fine excavation is slow, mapping requires special methods. Even touching the wrong surface can damage what you're trying to study. The underwater world makes patience necessary, and patience is not always what public curiosity wants. Public curiosity would prefer a clear answer by the end of the program, ideally with dramatic music and a computer reconstruction. The sea is under no such obligation. Yonaguni's disguise is not only physical, it is also historical. Once the formation became famous, the story around it began to affect how people saw it. A diver who arrives expecting a possible ruin may notice every straight line. A skeptic who arrives expecting natural geology may notice every fracture and ignore the overall impression. Both may be sincere, both may see real features, but expectation shapes attention. That is why careful study tries to slow down interpretation. Measure first, compare first. Ask what the rock is doing before asking what people may have done. This is sensible, although not always as emotionally satisfying as announcing that one has found the front steps of a vanished civilization. There is a gentle humility in admitting how much the ocean can change our view. The formation may seem still, but the conditions around it are never still. Water moves across it today. Marine life grows, sand shifts, storms pass overhead. Divers visit and leave, photographs circulate. The stone remains, but our access to it is always partial. We are not standing in front of a dry wall under clear daylight. We are looking through moving water at a surface that has been altered by that same water for a very long time. This does not mean we should give up on understanding it, quite the opposite. The ocean's disguise tells us what kind of care is needed. We need geology to explain the rock. We need archaeology to define what human evidence would look like. We need oceanography to understand currents and sediment movement. We need careful mapping to compare the site from many angles instead of relying on the most dramatic views. We need patience with uncertainty. And perhaps most difficult of all, we need the ability to let a place be interesting, even when it does not immediately become the story we hoped for. The ocean has made Yonaguni both more mysterious and harder to use as evidence. It has kept the formation hidden from casual view, which gives it the feeling of a secret. It has shaped, cleaned, and covered the surfaces, which makes them visually powerful. It has limited investigation, which leaves room for disagreement. It has turned stone into a question mark without ever needing to invent anything supernatural. That is impressive work for water, although water has always been something of an overachiever. As we drift over the terraces in thought, the disguise becomes part of the beauty of the place. A flat surface may be a bedding plane, a cut-looking edge may be a fracture, a channel may be erosion, a rough patch may hide something, or nothing at all. The sea does not clarify. It layers one process over another until the past becomes harder to read. It asks us to separate shape from meaning and evidence from desire. And once we understand that the ocean itself may be one of the main reasons the structure feels so difficult to explain, the next question comes naturally. If the stone can be read in more than one way, what stories have people built around it? What theories have drifted through the deep water and returned to the surface with divers, researchers, skeptics, and dreamers, each carrying a different version of what might be waiting there below the waves? Theories gather around the Yonaguni formation in the same way small fish gather around a reef. Some arrive quietly, some shine for a moment and vanish into darker water. Some stay close to the stone for years, circling the same ledges, the same steps, the same hard-looking corners. And because the formation itself does not explain anything, people have filled the silence with possibilities. Some possibilities are cautious, some are bold, some are very bold indeed. the sort that arrive wearing a hat indoors and using the word definitely far too early. The most careful place to begin is with the theory many geologists prefer. The formation is natural, not ordinary, not dull, not unworthy of attention, but natural. In this view, the underwater structure is a large rock formation shaped by bedding planes, joints, fractures, erosion, currents, and perhaps earthquake activity over time. Britannica summarizes the debate by saying some people see the ziggurat-like formation as an ancient city, while others argue it was naturally created. It also notes that critics of the man-made idea point to the structure appearing to be solid rock, rather than separate constructed blocks. This natural explanation may sound disappointing only if we underestimate what stone can do. Rock is not as random as it looks at first. Sedimentary rock often forms in layers. Those layers can split along flat plains. Vertical cracks can cross those layers. If water enters the cracks and works on them for long enough, pieces break away. A wall-like face appears. A shelf remains. Another crack widens. A channel forms. Step by step, not by intention, but by weakness, the stone begins to look organized. The result can resemble architecture because architecture often uses the same convenient shapes that rock sometimes naturally provides. Flat places, vertical sides, hard corners, and ledges that seem to invite names. Robert Schoch, a geologist who examined Yonaguni directly, has argued that the structure is primarily natural. On his own research page, he says that the rocks in the region break along horizontal and vertical planes, creating the step-like appearance, and that similar patterns can be seen both underwater and on the island's surface. He also allows a more modest possibility, suggesting that although the monument is mostly natural, some parts may have been touched up or used by ancient people. That is a useful theory because it does not flatten the mystery into a simple yes or no. It says the main form may be geology, while still leaving room for human attention at the edges. The natural theory also explains why the formation can look so convincing from some angles, and much less convincing from others. A diver moving along one face may see terraces that seem almost planned. A geologist looking at the same face may notice bedding planes and joints. A photograph may show the most dramatic section, while the surrounding messier stone stays outside the frame, minding its own business and refusing to help the mystery. Schoch told National Geographic that the site is not as regular as people often claim, and that the right angles and symmetry do not hold up everywhere. He also argued that marks interpreted as writing or images are natural scratches. That view gives us a calm, grounded explanation. It says the monument looks strange because nature can make strange things when the material is right and the timescale is long. The ocean then edits the shape by cleaning some surfaces, darkening others, widening cracks, and making the cleanest edges stand out. This theory does not need a vanished civilization. It does not need a hidden temple. It does not need a priest-king gazing over the Pacific while someone nearby complains about the wind. It only needs rock, pressure, faults, currents, and time. Still, the second theory refuses to drift away. This is the theory that the formation is at least partly human-made, or perhaps even the remains of a large ancient structure. The best-known supporter of this view has been Masaki Kimura, a marine geologist from the University of the Ryukyus, who studied the formation for many years and argued that some features showed signs of human influence. National Geographic reported that Kimura claimed to have identified quarry marks, rudimentary characters, carved faces, and rocks shaped like animals, and that he interpreted the wider site as including structures such as temples, roads, water channels, and a stadium. This theory is powerful because it gives the stone a human story. The broad terraces become places where people stood. The channels become routes or drains. The steps become access points. The holes become post holes. The shapes that resemble animals become symbols. Suddenly, the formation is not just rock. It becomes a place of purpose. In the imagination, the water lowers, sunlight touches the upper platform, and people appear. They walk along the edges, they carve signs, they build, gather, trade, worship or watch the sea. A formation that was silent a moment ago becomes full of movement. This is also why the theory must be handled carefully. It is easy to move from "this looks like something people might have made" to "people definitely made it." The first sentence is an observation, the second is a conclusion. Between them there should be evidence, and at Yonaguni, that evidence remains disputed. The features Kimura and others have pointed to are not widely accepted as proof of construction. Alleged carvings may be scratches. Holes may be made by currents or organisms. Roads may be natural channels. The site may be impressive without being engineered. The human-made theory gives us a compelling picture, but a compelling picture is not the same as a settled case. There is also a more dramatic version of the human-made theory, and it has travelled widely because dramatic theories are excellent swimmers. This version connects Yonaguni to a lost civilization, sometimes linked with Mu or Lemuria, legendary lands often treated as Pacific or Indian Ocean counterparts to Atlantis. Britannica notes that one theory claims the structures are at least 5,000 years old and belong to a lost civilization, possibly Mu or Lemuria. This idea gives the site a mythic frame. It is no longer simply a disputed rock formation near Japan. It becomes a surviving fragment of a drowned world. The appeal is easy to understand. A lost civilization beneath the water is one of those ideas that seems built for the human imagination. It combines ancient history, disaster, secrecy, and the ocean, which is already doing half the storytelling by being deep and blue and difficult to search. But the problem is that Mu and Lemuria, as lost continents, are not accepted historical civilizations supported by archaeology. They belong mostly to speculative literature, alternative history, and older attempts to explain things before modern geology and plate tectonics were understood. Linking Yonaguni to them adds drama, but it does not add proof. It is like putting a velvet curtain around a stone and hoping the curtain can do the work of an excavation report. A more reasonable form of the lost shoreline idea does not require a mythical continent at all. It simply begins with sea level. During the last ice age, global sea levels were much lower than they are today. As ice melted, coastlines changed and many former coastal landscapes became submerged. That means it is entirely reasonable to look for ancient human activity in places now underwater. People have always lived near coasts because coasts offer food, travel routes, and useful resources. The idea that ancient people may have known landscapes now beneath the sea is not strange. It is expected. Applied to Yonaguni, this theory says that the formation, or parts of the area around it, may once have been above water or closer to the surface. If so, people might have seen it, used it, or perhaps modified it. This does not require them to build the whole structure from scratch. They could have adapted a natural outcrop. They could have carved small sections. They could have used it as a lookout, a gathering place, a ritual place, or simply a striking landmark along the coast. In this version, the monument is not a city. It is a natural feature that may have become culturally meaningful. This middle theory is less flashy, which is probably why it does not get invited to as many documentaries. But it may be one of the most sensible possibilities to keep in mind. Humans often use natural places. Caves become shelters and shrines. Hills become fortifications. Cliffs become burial places. Springs become sacred sites. A natural terrace by the sea could matter to people without needing to be completely artificial. Schock's own position allows for something like this. He argues that Yonaguni is primarily natural, while suggesting some parts may have been touched up, and that ancient inhabitants may have admired or used the formation. There is another theory that focuses less on ancient builders and more on natural catastrophe. In this version, the formation may be a piece of coastline or coastal rock that was fractured, shifted, exposed or submerged by tectonic activity, earthquakes, or local geological movement. Yonaguni lies in a region where earthquakes are part of the broader geological setting, and some writers have suggested that earthquake damage and erosion could have helped create or expose the angular form. Scuba Diving magazine described the region as lying along the Ring of Fire, and noted that earthquakes and erosion may have played a role in shaping the monument. This theory is interesting because it explains the dramatic angularity without requiring long, gentle sculpting alone. A sudden break can create fresh faces, a large block can shift, a cliff section can collapse. The sea can then clean the fracture surfaces, making them appear even sharper. What looks like a constructed wall might be the exposed interior of a broken coastal formation. What looks like a series of steps might be a layered rock mass that fractured and dropped in sections. This does not make the structure ordinary. It makes it a kind of geological accident preserved underwater, which is still a remarkable thing to find while looking for fish. Some versions of the natural catastrophe theory also help explain why the formation does not show the rounded wear one might expect from a very old underwater structure. If the angular faces had been exposed underwater for an extremely long time in a high-energy environment, some observers argue they might be more worn down. If, instead, the current shape was exposed more recently by collapse or erosion, the edges could look sharper. This is not a final answer by itself, but it is one of the ways people try to make the physical appearance fit a timeline. The stone is not only asking what shaped it, it is also asking when. A different theory is not really about the stone at all, but about the human eye. This is the perception theory, the quiet little explanation that sits in the corner and politely raises its hand. It says that part of the mystery comes from pareidolia, the tendency to see meaningful patterns in ambiguous shapes. We see faces in tree bark, animals in clouds, and figures in rock. Underwater, with blue light, shadows, strong expectations, and limited time to observe, this tendency can become stronger. A rough animal-like stone becomes a carved turtle. A natural scratch becomes a symbol. A channel becomes a road. A ledge becomes a stair. This does not mean everyone who sees design at Yonaguni is foolish. It means the brain is doing what brains do. Pattern recognition is one of our strengths. It helps us survive, read faces, understand spaces, and notice danger. But it also creates false positives. Better to mistake a shadow for an animal now and then than to mistake an animal for a harmless shadow. The brain prefers meaning over randomness. So when it meets a giant step formation underwater, it begins sorting, naming, and completing the picture. The trouble is that the ocean does not always provide enough information to correct the first impression. There is a very human rhythm to this. A diver sees a terrace and thinks, that cannot be natural. Later, on land, someone points out bedding planes, fractures, and similar formations on the coast. The diver thinks again. Then another photograph shows a clean corner, and the certainty returns. Then a geologist explains how sandstone breaks. The certainty softens. This back and forth is not weakness. It may be the most honest response to the site. Scuba Diving magazine's account of diving Yonaguni captures that unstable feeling clearly, describing the monument as looking like a Maya temple, then noting doubts and the scientific consensus that the rocks are natural, while still allowing that some claim partial human modification. There are also theories that live more in popular culture than in research. Some people suggest connections to Atlantis, aliens, worldwide lost civilizations, or advanced ancient technology. These ideas usually appear because the formation looks too organized to some viewers, and because underwater mysteries are easily pulled into larger stories about forgotten history. But such claims need evidence even more than ordinary claims do, because they are much larger. A local natural formation requires geological explanation. A modified ancient coastal site requires archaeological evidence. A lost global civilization requires an enormous amount of evidence across many places, languages, tools, settlements, human remains, and datable material. Without that, it remains storytelling rather than history. The strongest theories are the ones that stay close to the rock. The natural geology theory stays close to the rock's material and fractures. The human modification theory stays close when it looks for specific marks, tools, or altered surfaces. The submerged landscape theory stays close when it considers sea levels and ancient coastlines. The perception theory stays close when it asks how divers and viewers interpret shapes. The more a theory drifts away from the formation and into grand claims about vanished continents or impossible knowledge, the less useful it becomes for understanding the actual site. Still, even the weaker theories tell us something about people. They show how strongly we want the sea to contain lost stories. They show how quickly a strange shape can become a doorway into ancient longing. There is nothing wrong with that feeling as long as it does not replace evidence. A person can enjoy the thought of a vanished city and still admit that the current evidence does not prove one. A person can love the mystery and still let geology speak. In fact, the mystery becomes calmer and more durable when it is not forced to carry more weight than it can hold. The most balanced picture, at least for now, may be this. Yonaguni is a real and unusually dramatic underwater rock formation. Its overall shape can look artificial, especially from certain angles and in certain lighting. Many geologists argue that its main features can be explained by natural rock layers, joints, erosion, currents, and tectonic activity. Some researchers and explorers have argued for human construction or modification, but the clear archaeological evidence needed to confirm a built monument has not been widely accepted. A middle possibility remains that ancient people may have noticed or lightly altered a natural formation, though even that would need stronger proof. That is not a disappointing conclusion, it is a living one. It leaves room for further mapping, better surveys, closer study of marks and surfaces, and careful comparison with the island's exposed geology. It also leaves room for wonder without letting wonder drive without a license. Yonaguni does not need to be a lost city to be worth our attention. It is already a place where stone, sea, perception, and history overlap in a way that unsettles easy categories. As the theories drift around it, the formation remains still beneath the water, giving each visitor just enough to think about and not quite enough to be certain. One person sees a natural staircase made by fractures. Another sees an ancient platform drowned by rising seas. Another sees a coastal outcrop possibly used by people long ago. Another sees the brain turning shadows into intention. Each theory has its own weight, its own weakness, and its own way of explaining the same cold stone faces. The hard part is not finding a theory. There are plenty of those. The hard part is deciding which one survives when divers, geologists, archaeologists, currents, photographs, and evidence all meet in the same restless place. Scientists still disagree because the Yonaguni formation sits in that awkward place where a thing can be visually convincing but scientifically unfinished. It looks organised enough to raise questions, yet it has not produced the kind of widely accepted archaeological evidence that would settle the matter. Britannica describes the site as an underwater rock structure near Yonaguni Island, Japan, with some people interpreting its ziggurat-like form as part of an ancient city, while others argue that it was naturally created by underwater currents and geological processes. That is the first reason the disagreement survives. The formation looks like something, but looking like something is not the same as being that thing. A rock can resemble a wall without being a wall. A ledge can resemble a stair without being a stair. A channel can resemble a path without anyone ever walking along it, and yet the resemblance matters, because it is strong enough that trained divers, researchers, writers, and visitors keep noticing it. The eye does not move past Yonaguni easily. It pauses, it tries to classify. It says, "This feels arranged." Then the slower part of the mind, the part that has to deal with evidence, comes along with a clipboard and says, "All right, but arranged by what?" For researchers who favour a natural explanation, the answer begins with the rock itself. Geologist Robert Schoch, who has dived at the site, argues that the formation is primarily natural. He explains that the rocks in the region break along both horizontal and vertical planes, creating clean step-like forms, and he points out that similar breaking patterns can be seen both underwater and on Yonaguni's surface. To a geologist, those horizontal and vertical breaks are not suspicious by themselves. They are expected in certain kinds of layered rock. Sandstone and mudstone can split along bedding planes. Joints can run through the stone in straight or nearly straight lines, add erosion, strong currents, and tectonic stress. And the result can be a very orderly-looking landscape without a single builder involved. But for those who suspect human involvement, the overall pattern still feels difficult to dismiss. They look not only at one ledge or one flat surface, but at the concentration of features, the terraces, the edges, the apparent steps, the holes, the possible marks, the nearby formations. Masaki Kimura, a marine geologist from the University of the Ryukyus, became one of the best-known supporters of the human-made or human-modified interpretation, and National Geographic reported that he claimed to have identified quarry marks, rudimentary characters, carved faces, and animal-like stone forms at the site. From that point of view, the question is not whether nature can make one straight line. Of course it can. The question is whether nature made all these features in one place in a way that only happens to resemble a structure. This is where scientists and researchers begin to talk past one another, often without meaning to. One side tends to focus on process. What natural forces can produce this shape? What does the rock type do? What happens when bedding planes, joints, currents and earthquakes work together? The other side tends to focus on appearance and pattern. Why are there so many flat surfaces? Why do some features look like steps? Why do certain marks seem placed? Why does the whole formation feel more organised than ordinary broken rock? Both approaches are understandable. One starts from geology, the other starts from visual pattern. They meet at the same stone, but they arrive by different routes. The second reason disagreement continues is that the site lacks one decisive object. There is no widely accepted inscription that says, in effect, yes, we built this, and please stop arguing. There is no confirmed carved date, no sealed layer of pottery embedded in construction fill, no clear quarry debris, no unmistakable tool marks accepted by most specialists, no known settlement plan surrounding the structure. National Geographic noted that more direct evidence of human involvement at the site has been harder to come by, even while Kimura continued to argue for further research. That absence does not prove no person ever touched the site. It simply prevents the human-made theory from moving from interesting possibility to accepted conclusion. Archaeology is careful because it has to be. A shape is not enough. Archaeologists want context. They want objects in place, layers that can be dated, repeated construction methods, signs of use, and evidence that fits together without needing too much imagination to hold it up. A single possible carving might be natural, a single hole might be erosion, a single flat surface might be a bedding plane. But a set of artifacts, tool marks, structural joints, and datable remains would be much harder to dismiss. Yonaguni has not yet given researchers that kind of clear package. It has given them a striking formation, and then it has gone quiet, which is rather inconsiderate for something that has caused this much discussion. The third reason scientists still disagree is that the ocean makes everything harder. On land, a disputed stone site can be walked, measured, mapped, scraped clean, examined in changing daylight and revisited with relative ease. Underwater, even simple observation becomes a small expedition. Divers must deal with air supply, depth, currents, visibility, equipment, and safety. Atlas Obscura notes that the Yonaguni site is popular with divers but can be subject to strong currents, which is exactly the sort of detail that sounds practical until you imagine trying to inspect a tiny mark on a rock while the Pacific is nudging you sideways like an impatient waiter. Those conditions affect evidence. A mark that might be clear on land may be partly covered by algae or marine growth. A surface may be hidden by sand during one visit and exposed during another. A current may clean one ledge while leaving another rough and confusing. Light can make a crack look deeper or a corner sharper. Photographs can make the formation look more regular than it is by showing the strongest angles. Schock told National Geographic that many photographs tend to present the site from perfect views, making the lines look as regular as possible, while he argued the right angles and symmetry do not hold up everywhere. This does not mean the photographs are fake, it means they are selective. All photographs are selective. A holiday photograph may show a peaceful beach and not the person behind the camera, arguing with a sandwich wrapper in the wind. In the same way, photographs of Yonaguni often show the most monument-like features because those are the features people find interesting. Over time, the public version of the site can become cleaner, sharper and more organised than the full underwater landscape. Scientists disagree partly because they may not be weighing the same version of the site. One person is thinking of a dramatic image, another is thinking of the complete rock mass, including all the awkward, messy, less convincing parts that rarely become famous. The fourth reason is that natural geology can look annoyingly artificial. This is not unique to Yonaguni. Around the world there are natural features that resemble columns, walls, roads, steps, or paving stones. The Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland has basalt columns that look almost too neat. Dry mud cracks into geometric patterns. Crystals form regular faces. Coastal cliffs can break into blocks. Shore platforms can produce flat surfaces at repeated levels. Nature has no intention, but it does have physical rules, and those rules can make shapes that resemble design. Schoch's own account stresses that the Yonaguni rocks break along clean horizontal and vertical lines, producing forms that can look like giant steps carved from bedrock. This is one of those facts that makes the human brain slightly uncomfortable. We like to separate the world into natural curves and human straight lines. But the real world refuses to behave that simply. Nature can be straight. Humans can be messy. A broken cliff can look engineered, while an actual ancient wall can become so damaged that it looks like ordinary rubble. This makes visual judgment unreliable. It is not useless, but it cannot carry the whole argument. The eye can start the investigation, it cannot finish it alone. The fifth reason is that even the natural side has room for nuance. Schoch, despite arguing that Yonaguni is primarily natural, has suggested that parts may have been touched up by ancient humans, and that ancient inhabitants may have admired or used the formation. That middle position is important because it shows why the debate is not just a simple fight between built and not built. A natural formation could still have mattered to people. People often use natural places. They carve into caves, they gather at cliffs, they mark stones, they turn springs, peaks, and unusual outcrops into meaningful sites. A formation does not have to be built from scratch to be part of human history. But this middle possibility is also difficult to prove. Light modification may leave subtle traces. Subtle traces are exactly the kind most easily damaged or hidden underwater. If someone cleared a terrace, carved a small mark, widened a crack, or used a natural platform for some purpose thousands of years ago, the ocean may have blurred the evidence. That leaves researchers with a frustrating possibility. Human involvement could have happened at a small scale, but the remaining signs may not be strong enough to confirm it. Science cannot simply accept that as fact, because it feels plausible. It needs evidence that can be tested, and so the middle ground remains open, interesting, and unresolved. The sixth reason is that dating the site is not straightforward. If someone says the structure is ancient, the next question is ancient in what sense? Is the rock itself ancient? Of course. Is the shape ancient? Perhaps. Was it exposed above sea level at some point? That depends on sea level, local uplift, subsidence, and tectonic history. Was it shaped by humans at a specific time? That would require datable evidence tied to human activity. The rock may be millions of years old, while the surface shape may be much younger, and any possible human interaction would be younger still. These are different clocks, all ticking on the same stone, and none of them wears a convenient label. Supporters of the man-made theory have proposed different ages over time. National Geographic reported Kimura's belief that the ruins date back at least 5,000 years, while other accounts of the debate note that some claims have pushed the idea much further back. But dating a formation like this is not the same as dating a piece of charcoal from a hearth or a wooden beam from a building. If there is no clear human material directly associated with construction or use, then age estimates can become arguments about sea levels, tectonics, surface exposure, and interpretation. That gives plenty of room for disagreement. The seventh reason is professional background. A geologist and an archaeologist may ask different questions. A geologist may look at Yonaguni and ask how layered sedimentary rock breaks under stress. An archaeologist may ask where the artefacts are. A marine scientist may ask what currents do to exposed surfaces. A diver may ask how the site feels when moving through it. A historian may ask whether any known culture in the region fits the proposed timeline. A popular writer may ask whether this could rewrite history. All of these questions are related, but they are not the same question. When people ask different questions, they can look at the same evidence and feel that different parts matter most. This does not mean experts are simply choosing what they want to believe. It means expertise trains attention. The geologist notices bedding planes. The archaeologist notices the absence of diagnostic artifacts. The diver notices the strange atmosphere of the place. The alternative history writer notices the possibility of a lost coast. The filmmaker notices the most dramatic wall, because the most dramatic wall is much better television than a careful explanation of sandstone jointing. Each lens changes the story. The eighth reason is that public interest has kept the mystery alive in a way that pure academic debate might not have. If Yonaguni were an obscure coastal outcrop on land, it might be discussed in a few geological papers and then left mostly alone. But underwater, near a remote island, with a stepped shape and a possible lost civilization story, it becomes much more than a rock formation. It becomes a symbol. People use it to talk about forgotten history, sea level rise, ancient engineering, scientific skepticism, and the limits of what we know. Atlas Obscura summarizes that the formation remains debated as completely man-made, entirely natural, or altered by human hands, and also notes that Japan's Agency for Cultural Affairs and the government of Okinawa Prefecture do not recognize it as a historical cultural site. That lack of official recognition matters, but it does not stop public fascination. In fact, it may even strengthen it for some people, because disputed mysteries often grow more attractive when institutions remain cautious. A cautious agency says, "There is not enough evidence to classify this as a cultural artifact." A more excited listener hears, "They have not explained it." Then the gap fills with speculation. This is not always malicious. It is often just human nature. We prefer a story to a non-classification. Possibly natural submarine topography is accurate, but not exactly the sort of phrase that keeps people awake at night, unless they are already very enthusiastic about geology, in which case, good for them. The ninth reason scientists still disagree is that each side has a different threshold for proof. For many geologists and archaeologists, the default explanation should be natural unless there is strong evidence of human work. This is a conservative approach, not in the political sense but in the evidence sense. Do not multiply claims beyond what the evidence requires. If rock layers, joints, erosion, and currents can explain the shape, then there is no need to add an ancient civilization. For supporters of human modification, the visual pattern feels too concentrated to be dismissed, and the absence of evidence may be explained by underwater damage, strong currents, or incomplete study. So one side says, natural processes are enough. The other says, natural processes do not feel sufficient. That difference in threshold keeps the argument open. The quiet truth is that I cannot explain this easily is not the same as therefore humans built it. But it is also true that natural processes can make similar things, is not always the same as therefore every feature here is natural. Good investigation lives between those mistakes. It asks for the strongest version of each explanation. It admits when a feature is strange. It also asks whether strange means artificial. It takes the human-made idea seriously enough to test it, and the natural idea seriously enough not to treat geology as a boring fallback. There is also an emotional reason the disagreement persists. A natural formation is interesting, but a drowned human structure is thrilling. It suggests a story with people in it. People standing on terraces, people watching the sea, people building or carving before the water came. A natural explanation can feel like the removal of that story, but science is not trying to remove wonder. It is trying to attach wonder to what can be known. If Yonaguni is natural, then the wonder belongs to geology and the ocean. If it was modified by humans, then the wonder belongs also to ancient coastal life. If it was fully built, then the wonder would be archaeological. The emotional size of the claim does not decide which one is true. The disagreement remains because the site allows different levels of interpretation. At the lowest level, everyone agrees there is a real formation. At the next level, many agree it looks unusual. Above that, opinions split. Some say the unusual appearance is best explained by natural rock structure and erosion. Some say the pattern suggests human modification. Some go further and propose a lost settlement or civilization. Each step upward requires more evidence. The further the claim travels, the heavier the evidence needs to be. Yonaguni gives enough to begin the climb, but not enough to reach the top with confidence. So scientists still disagree, not because the mystery is impossible in some magical way, but because the evidence is mixed, incomplete, difficult to gather and easy to interpret differently. The formation is real. The geometry is striking. The geology is plausible. The archaeological proof is weak. The underwater setting complicates inspection. Photographs can exaggerate regularity. Human perception looks for design. Sea level history keeps the broader question of submerged landscapes alive. And somewhere beneath all of that, the stone remains where it was, patient and silent, letting each new visitor bring their own expectations down through the blue water. That may be the most honest place to leave the disagreement for now. Not solved, not dismissed, not inflated into certainty. Scientists disagree because Yonaguni sits at the edge of several fields at once. It is geology, but it looks like architecture. It is underwater, but it may relate to old shorelines. It is a tourist dive site, but it has become part of a larger argument about ancient history. It is famous, but fame is not evidence. It is natural looking up close to some people, and strangely deliberate looking from a distance to others. And with that disagreement still drifting above the terraces, another layer of the story begins to matter. Because even if the monument is mostly natural, the sea around it has not always been where it is today. Coastlines have moved. Islands have shifted. People once lived beside shores that are now gone. To understand why Yonaguni keeps pulling the imagination toward lost places, we need to look beyond the formation itself and think about ancient seas, drowned landscapes, and the long, slow changes that have carried parts of the human past beneath the water. Long before anyone gave the Yonaguni formation a name, before divers traced its edges with their lamps, before photographs of its terraces wandered across books, television, and the internet, the sea itself was living a much larger story. Coastlines were not fixed. Islands were not always shaped as they are now. Places that feel permanent on a map were, in geological terms, still negotiating their boundaries with the water. The shore was not a line drawn once and left alone. It moved. It advanced and retreated. It swallowed lowlands, exposed shelves, split communities, joined islands, and quietly changed the stage on which human life unfolded. This matters because the mystery beneath Yonaguni does not sit outside time. It sits inside a long history of changing sea levels, shifting land, ancient movement across water, and landscapes that are now gone from ordinary view. Whether the formation is natural, modified, or something not yet fully understood, it belongs to a world where the ocean has not always been where it is today. That single fact is enough to keep the imagination awake, though hopefully not too awake, because we are still being gentle about this. Around 20,000 years ago, near the end of the last ice age, much more of Earth's water was locked away in vast ice sheets. Global sea level was far lower than it is now. The Smithsonian's Ocean Portal summarises this simply. Over roughly the past 20,000 years, sea level has climbed about 400 feet, or around 120 metres, as the climate warmed and ice melted. NOAA material gives the same broad figure, noting that sea level rose by about 120 metres after the last ice age before stabilising several thousand years ago. That is not a small change. That is not the sea politely rearranging the edge of a beach. That is enough water to cover valleys, plains, river mouths, caves, hunting grounds, campsites, paths, burial places, and shorelines, where people may once have stood watching an ocean that was lower, wider, and different. It is easy to forget this because modern coastlines feel final. We grow up seeing them on maps, in weather reports, in holiday photos, and in the little blue shapes on classroom globes. The land is beige or green. The sea is blue. The line between them looks clean and confident, as if someone with a very steady hand drew it and said, "There, that should do." But the real coastline is never that certain. It is tide, storm, sand, cliff, mud, reef, river, and time. It is the place where the planet is still making small adjustments. And over thousands of years, small adjustments become an entirely different world. For people living near the sea at the end of the Ice Age, the rising water would not have appeared as one sudden wall racing across the land, at least not most of the time. It would have been slower, uneven, and local. A low place flooded, a beach changed, a river mouth shifted, a familiar route became marshy, then tidal, then unreachable. A fishing place moved. A campsite that had been safe for generations became too close to the water. People adapted because people always adapt, sometimes gracefully, sometimes with a great deal of grumbling, which is fair enough if your favourite shoreline has just become seabed. This is why submerged landscapes matter to archaeologists. They are not just empty sea floor. They may contain the missing edges of human history. UNESCO describes underwater cultural heritage as including shipwrecks, sunken cities, prehistoric sites, and submerged landscapes, and notes that rising sea levels and natural disasters have placed traces of past societies beneath the water. In other words, the sea is not only covering geology. In many places it is covering former human worlds, not always grand cities, more often quieter things, camps, tools, bones, wood, hearths, paths, shell middens, fishing places, and the ordinary evidence of lives that did not know they would one day be discussed by people with sonar equipment. A famous example is Doggerland, the prehistoric landscape that once connected parts of what are now Britain and continental Europe. UNESCO describes it as a submerged prehistoric landscape beneath the North Sea, one that shows how rising sea levels forced migration and adaptation among Mesolithic communities. Doggerland reminds us that lost lands do not need to be mythical to be moving. They do not need marble temples or golden towers. Sometimes the most powerful lost place is a plain where people hunted, gathered, made tools, told stories, raised children, and followed rivers that now run beneath cold water. That is the kind of background that makes Yonaguni feel so charged. Not because Doggerland proves anything about Yonaguni. It does not. They are different places, different regions, different histories. But Doggerland proves something broader and important. the sea really has covered former human landscapes. The idea of a drowned past is not only fantasy, it is part of archaeology. The difficult work is separating real submerged heritage from suggestive shapes that only look like heritage. And that, once again, is where Yonaguni waits, very calmly, like a stone that knows it has caused trouble. If we imagine the waters near Yonaguni during periods of lower sea level, the scene changes. Areas now underwater may have been closer to the surface, exposed, or part of a different coastal environment. The formation itself may have looked different depending on local sea level, tectonic movement, erosion, and island history. A feature that today requires scuba equipment may once have been a reef edge, a coastal outcrop, a wave-battered platform, or a visible cliff-like structure along a shoreline. It may have stood in air. It may have been partly submerged. It may have been shaped by waves before being covered more deeply. The honest answer is that reconstructing that exact local past is not simple. Global sea level gives us the broad story, but local geology writes its own footnotes, often in very small handwriting. This distinction is important. When people hear that sea levels were lower, they may immediately imagine the Yonaguni Formation standing high and dry like a lost temple waiting beside the waves. It is possible that parts of the landscape around it were exposed at some point, but possibility is not the same as a finished picture. Land can rise or sink. Earthquakes can shift rock. Currents can erode. Sediment can cover and uncover. A formation may be older than its present shape. A surface may have been shaped in stages. The sea level story opens the door. It does not carry in all the furniture and arrange the room. Still, the door is worth opening. Ancient people were present in this wider region for a very long time, and the sea was not an empty barrier. Recent research on prehistoric seafaring in the Ryukyu Islands has explored how early humans may have crossed difficult waters long before modern navigation. In 2025, researchers reported an experimental voyage in a dugout canoe from Taiwan to Yonaguni, showing that such a crossing was physically possible for skilled paddlers and navigators. Reuters reported that the team covered about 225 kilometers in more than 45 hours while dealing with the powerful Kuroshio current. This does not prove anything about the underwater formation. It does, however, remind us that ancient people in this part of the world were not helpless land-bound figures staring nervously at the sea. They could cross water, they could read currents, swells, stars, weather, and risk. The ocean was dangerous, yes, but danger has never stopped humans from trying things, especially when food, land, trade, or curiosity are involved. That context matters because some of the weakest versions of the Yonaguni story imagine ancient people as either impossibly advanced or not present at all. Reality is usually more interesting. The past was full of capable people using the materials, knowledge, and skills available to them. They did not need metal tools, engines, maps, or satellite weather apps to understand the sea. They had observation, repetition, memory, and a very strong incentive not to get lost. A person who can cross open water in a simple vessel is not primitive in the lazy sense that word is sometimes used. They are skilled in a world where mistakes can be final. That deserves respect, and possibly a warm towel. So if people once saw the Yonaguni Formation above or near the waterline, what might it have meant to them? This is where we must move carefully. It may have meant nothing. It may have been only rock. Humans do not turn every dramatic cliff into a sacred site, despite what documentaries sometimes imply while showing slow-motion clouds. But unusual natural features often do become landmarks. A large stepped stone mass near the sea could help with navigation. It could mark a fishing ground. It could be a place where people gathered, rested, watched weather, or told stories. It could have been noticed without being built. It could have been used without leaving obvious traces. It could have become meaningful without becoming architecture. This is one of the softer possibilities around Yonaguni, and it is worth keeping because it does not demand too much. It does not require an unknown city. It does not require a lost continent. It does not require stone blocks moved by a vanished civilization. It only asks whether a natural formation, if exposed or accessible, might have entered human life in some way. That is not wild. People everywhere have used natural landscapes as part of culture. Caves become shelters and ritual spaces. Springs become important. Mountains become landmarks. Strange rocks get names. A flat ledge can become a meeting place. A cliff can become a boundary. The line between natural place and human place is often thinner than we think. But archaeology cannot live on reasonable images alone. If ancient people used the formation, we would still want evidence. Tools, marks, datable remains, nearby settlement traces, or signs of repeated activity. And that is where the sea becomes frustrating again. If the evidence was light to begin with, thousands of years underwater could have scattered it. If there were small objects, currents may have moved them. If there were marks, marine life may have covered them. If there were wooden objects, survival would depend on burial conditions. If there were hearths, they may have been eroded or buried. The absence of strong evidence does not prove absence of all human contact, but it does mean we cannot speak as if contact is proven. The sea allows possibility, then takes away certainty. It is a very old habit. Recent work in other parts of the world shows why archaeologists still search underwater, even when the work is slow. In 2025, archaeologists working in Denmark investigated a submerged Stone Age settlement in the Bay of Aarhus, collecting evidence such as animal bones, stone tools, arrowheads, worked wood, and other preserved material from a landscape drowned by post-Ice Age sea level rise. That kind of discovery is important, because it shows what convincing submerged archaeology can look like. Not just a shape that resembles a structure, but objects, layers, materials, and a setting that can be studied. It also shows why patience matters. The seabed can preserve astonishing things, but it does not hand them over easily. Yonaguni, so far, has not produced an equivalent accepted collection of archaeological evidence. That does not make it worthless. It places it in a different category. It is a visually striking geological and interpretive problem, not a confirmed submerged settlement. This is an important distinction, but it does not need to be said with a heavy hammer. A place can be fascinating without being a city. It can be ancient without being built. It can matter to science because it shows how hard it is to read the meeting point between nature, perception, and human history. The phrase "lost shores" may sound dramatic, but it describes something very real. Around the world, the best places for ancient people to live were often near water, and many of those places now lie offshore. Rivers met the sea. Shellfish could be gathered. Fish could be caught. Birds, plants, and animals gathered in coastal zones. Travel by boat or along beaches was easier than crossing dense inland terrain. The shore was not an edge of life. It was often a centre of life. When the sea rose, it did not only cover empty space, it covered some of the most attractive living places humans had. That means our picture of the deep past is uneven. Inland sites survive where they were not destroyed or buried beyond reach. Coastal sites, especially older ones, may be missing because the coast moved. This creates a bias in the archaeological record. We may underestimate how important the sea was simply because many early coastal places are now underwater. In that sense, Yonaguni belongs to a much broader problem. The ocean is not only a source of mystery, it is a missing archive. Of course, archives can be misread. If you open an old box and find a torn page, you should not immediately write the entire novel yourself. Yonaguni is a torn page at best, perhaps not even a page. Perhaps a natural pattern that looks like writing from across the room. But the presence of a missing coastal archive makes the question worth asking carefully. Did people once know this formation? Could they have used it? Did the changing sea erase the surrounding context? Or are we seeing a powerful natural shape and projecting human stories onto it, because lost shores are so easy to imagine? Forgotten time is not empty time. This is another useful thought. When we say something happened thousands of years ago, the number can become soft and distant, almost decorative. 5,000 years, 10,000 years, 20,000 years. The mind struggles to feel the difference. But these were real spans full of weather, hunger, skill, birth, death, travel, repair, risk, and memory. The people of those times did not think of themselves as ancient. They were simply alive in their own present. Their coastlines were normal to them. Their tools were practical. Their paths made sense. Their sea was the sea they knew. It is only from our side of the waterline that their world seems lost. If the Yonaguni Formation was visible in any part of that long human past, it would have belonged to such a present. Not to myth, not to a fantasy of golden cities, to weather, stone, salt, and daily life. Maybe no one built it. Maybe no one carved it. Maybe people passed nearby and used it as a landmark, saying something ordinary like, "Turn when you see the stepped rock," though probably not in English and probably with less concern for future narration. Maybe it was never seen at all in the way we imagine. Maybe it was already underwater, already being shaped by currents, long before anyone who might have used it arrived. The point is not to choose the most exciting image. The point is to allow the past to be complicated. There is a kind of comfort in that complication. It means the world is not a finished catalogue. Even now, with satellites, sonar, databases and maps, there are places where the boundary between geology and history remains unclear. The ocean keeps many of those places. It keeps them not as a villain, not as a locked vault, but as an environment where evidence is changed by the very conditions that preserve it. A submerged landscape may hide tools in one place and grind them away in another. It may bury wood in oxygen-poor sediment and leave nearby stone exposed to currents. It may keep a settlement safe for millennia, or remove it piece by piece until only a suggestive shape remains. This is why the Yonaguni Formation continues to draw people back into deep time. It stands, or rather rests, at the meeting point of several true things. Sea levels really did rise after the last ice age. Ancient people really did live near coasts that have since changed. Submerged prehistoric landscapes really can preserve evidence of human life. The Ryukyu region really was part of ancient seafaring questions. Natural geology really can produce shapes that resemble construction. And Yonaguni really has not given the clear archaeological proof needed to call it a confirmed human-built monument. Each true thing pulls in a slightly different direction. The result is not a clean answer, but a field of tension, quiet and persistent. Perhaps that is what forgotten time feels like when we meet it underwater. Not a single secret waiting to be opened, but many slow processes layered together. Ice melting, seas rising, islands shifting, currents cutting, rock cracking, people moving, memory fading, fish passing through places that may once have been dry, or may never have been dry enough for a human foot. The present seafloor becomes a palimpsest, though that is a rather serious word for bedtime, so let us say instead that it is like an old surface written over many times. Some marks are clear, some are stains, some are only shadows, some may not be writing at all. And so the ancient seas do not solve Yonaguni, but they deepen the question in a useful way. They remind us not to laugh too quickly at the thought of drowned human places, because drowned human places exist. They remind us not to accept every dramatic shape as a ruin, because nature is more than capable of dramatic shapes. They remind us that the past near the shore is often missing pieces, and that missing pieces are dangerous because the imagination likes to replace them with whatever story it prefers. The better response is slower. Look at the stone. Look at the sea level history. Look at the local geology. Look at what ancient people in the region could do. Look at what evidence exists and what evidence does not. Let the lost shores remain real without turning them into a lost city too quickly. Let forgotten time remain human without filling it with unsupported certainty. That is a quieter kind of mystery. but it is stronger because it can stand in daylight as well as underwater shadow, and with that we are left with the image of the formation beneath the waves, not just as a shape on the seafloor, but as part of a much older coastline story. Around it, the water moves through a world that has changed many times. Above it, islands rise into weather and salt. Behind it, sea levels, earthquakes, erosion, and human movement stretch back farther than memory. Ahead of it, the question remains open, not wide open to every claim, but open enough to invite one final return to the deep, where the structure waits without answering, and where the ocean keeps what it has always kept best: silence, pressure, and a few remaining secrets. And now, after drifting across the terraces, the currents, the arguments, and the long memory of changing seas, we come back to the quiet fact that began all of this. There is a formation beneath the water near Yonaguni Island. It is large, it is angular, it is real. Divers have seen it with their own eyes. Photographs show broad, flat surfaces, ledges, drops, and edges that make the mind pause. Some people see a natural rock formation shaped by layers, cracks, erosion, and strong currents. Others see signs of human hands, or at least the possibility that ancient people once noticed, used or changed part of the stone before the sea covered it. And after all these years, the structure has not kindly lifted one corner of itself and revealed a neat answer underneath. That may be the most honest thing to say about it. The deep has not explained itself fully. It has given us enough to wonder, enough to investigate, enough to argue, and enough to remain careful. But it has not given us enough to declare, without hesitation, that a lost civilization built the whole thing. It has also not made the formation so ordinary that everyone can simply shrug and swim away. Yonaguni remains in that narrow, interesting space between mystery and evidence, between shape and meaning, between what the eyes notice and what science can confirm. There is something very human about that space. We do not like unfinished stories. We like the final page, the solved puzzle, the detective gathering everyone in the drawing room and explaining exactly who moved the stone terrace and why the fish looked suspicious. But the natural world rarely behaves like a detective novel. It does not always provide clean endings. It provides layers. It provides clues that may or may not be clues. It provides strong impressions and weaker evidence. It gives us patterns and then asks whether the pattern belongs to nature, to people, or to our own restless habit of seeing order wherever we can. The Yonaguni formation is powerful because it uses all three. It has natural order in the rock. It may have some connection to human attention, though that remains unproven, and it certainly draws on our need to see intention in shape. A flat surface becomes a platform. A crack becomes a channel. A drop becomes a wall. A ledge becomes a step. The mind builds quickly. It is a gifted builder, the mind, though not always a reliable contractor. Sometimes it gives us insight. Sometimes it adds a doorway where there's only shadow. And yet, we should not be too hard on imagination. Imagination is often the first lamp lowered into darkness. Without it, a diver might see an unusual stone and think no further. Without it, scientists might not ask whether an old coastline lies hidden offshore. Without it, archaeologists might not search drowned landscapes for traces of ancient lives. Curiosity begins with the feeling that something deserves another look. The important part is what happens next. A good mystery does not ask us to stop thinking. It asks us to think more carefully. That is what this underwater structure does so well. It invites the wild thought first, then the careful thought after. It lets the mind imagine a dry shoreline where there is now blue water. It lets us picture people standing near the edge of a great stone outcrop, watching weather move across the sea. It lets us wonder whether hands ever cleared a surface, widened a notch, carved a mark, or gave the place a name. Then it gently brings us back to the rock itself. Sandstone, mudstone, bedding planes, joints, fractures, currents, erosion, tectonic force. the practical, physical world where stone breaks along weakness, water removes what it can, and time does not rush, because time has never had a train to catch. There is no shame in that natural explanation. If the formation is mostly or entirely natural, it is still remarkable. It means the Earth made something so architectural in appearance that humans have spent decades trying to decide whether it had builders. That alone is worth attention. Nature does not need to imitate us, but sometimes it does so by accident, and the result is humbling. We often think of human design as the highest form of order. Then a cliff, a cave, a crystal, a basalt column, or an underwater rock face appears and reminds us that order can emerge without a plan. The world has been making shapes long before we arrived, with rulers, ropes, and the occasional unreasonable deadline. If, on the other hand, some part of the formation was altered or used by people, that too would be meaningful. It would not need to be a lost city to matter. A natural stone place can become human simply because people return to it, remember it, mark it, or build their lives around it. Not every important place has walls. Not every ancient site has streets. Some places matter because they are useful, some because they are strange, some because they sit at the edge of land and water and give people a fixed point in a changing world. If Yonaguni was ever such a place, the sea has made that story hard to read. Not impossible perhaps, but hard. And if the boldest claims are true, if some future discovery were to show clear construction, tools, datable material, unmistakable carvings, and a human plan beneath the present stone, then the story would change. Science allows for that. It is not a locked door. It does not say never, it says show the evidence. That can sound stern, but it is actually a form of respect. A real ancient structure deserves more than excitement. It deserves proof strong enough to protect it from fantasy. It deserves careful maps, careful dates, careful study, and careful words. The past should not be turned into a stage prop just because it is silent. The deep makes this harder, of course. The ocean has no interest in preserving our categories. It covers natural formations and human remains alike. It wears down one surface and protects another. It moves sand into cracks. It grows living things over stone. It shifts visibility from day to day. It gives divers only a limited time to observe. It turns a simple question into a difficult one. A site on land can be measured under the same sun again and again. A site underwater changes with light, current, season, and angle. You do not simply walk up to it and ask for clarification. You descend, breathe carefully, stay aware of your body, your air, your partner, the current, and the fact that the sea is much larger than your research schedule. That is part of why the structure feels so alive in the imagination. It is not alive, of course. It is stone, but the conditions around it are always moving. Fish pass over the terraces, currents press along the faces, shadows slide into cracks, sand gathers and leaves. The shape stays, but the view changes. The answer may be somewhere in the details, and the details are always partly hidden. It is a very patient kind of difficulty. Maybe that is why underwater mysteries feel different from ruins on land. A ruin in a field may be old, lonely and beautiful, but it is still in our world of air. It shares our weather. We can stand beside it and talk too loudly near a sign that says, "Please be respectful." Underwater, the body enters another set of rules. Sound changes. Movement slows. Breath becomes something you hear. Even a simple stone ledge seems removed from ordinary time. The water makes the past feel farther away, even when the object is close enough to touch. The ocean also changes the emotional weight of the story. A possible ruin on land suggests age. A possible ruin underwater suggests loss. Water covering stone makes us think of endings, of shorelines moving, of places abandoned or swallowed. Even when the explanation is natural, the feeling remains. We know that seas have risen. We know that coastlines have changed. We know that people once lived beside shores that no longer exist. so the sight of a stepped formation beneath the water naturally pulls us toward the idea of a drowned world. That pull is not evidence, but it is understandable. The safest way to hold Yonaguni is gently, not as proof of a hidden civilization, not as an ordinary rock unworthy of attention, not as a puzzle we are entitled to solve quickly. Hold it as a real place where several true things meet. The structure looks unusual. Natural geology can create unusual shapes. Ancient coastlines have changed. Human communities have lived near the sea for a very long time. The accepted evidence for full construction is weak. The possibility of past human attention is interesting but unconfirmed. The ocean has altered whatever was there before we saw it. The mystery is not empty, but it is not settled. That kind of answer can feel unsatisfying at first. It does not give the mind a clear shelf to put the story on, but not every good answer is a shelf. Some answers are more like a window. They let us see several things at once. Through Yonaguni, we can see the power of geology. We can see the difficulty of underwater archaeology. We can see the movement of ancient sea levels. We can see how people respond to patterns. We can see how quickly wonder can become certainty if it is not slowed down. We can also see that uncertainty is not the enemy of curiosity. Sometimes uncertainty is the reason curiosity keeps going. Perhaps that is the real gift of the formation. It teaches restraint without removing wonder. It asks us to sit beside an unanswered question without immediately decorating it with whatever story we prefer. That is harder than it sounds. The modern world is full of quick conclusions. Everything must be named, judged, sorted, posted, corrected, and argued over before the kettle has finished boiling. Yonaguni does not work at that speed. It waits underwater. It has waited longer than our opinions. It will likely keep waiting after many of them have changed. There is comfort in that. The structure is not in a hurry. The sea is not in a hurry. The stone is not checking whether we have reached a consensus. Down there, beneath moving water, the argument becomes smaller. Human certainty softens. The day's noise fades. A diver's bubbles rise toward the surface one after another, and the great stone shape remains below, silent and heavy. Whether we call it a monument, a formation, a ruin, or a mistake made by our pattern-loving eyes. And now, dear listener, we have followed that shape as far as we can for tonight. We began with the strange structure on the seafloor, then moved closer to its terraces and ledges. We looked at how it was found, how it has been interpreted, how the ocean disguises evidence, and why researchers still disagree. We wandered through theories that range from careful geology to ancient human modification, and from lost shores to the wider story of seas that have risen across the world. We did not force the mystery to become more than it is, and we did not drain it of its quiet power. We simply stayed with it. That is a good way to leave certain mysteries, not abandoned, not solved too soon, just held with care. Some things become clearer with better tools, better surveys, better evidence, and more patient work. Perhaps one day Yonaguni will be understood more completely. Perhaps a future survey will show its natural structure in such detail that the debate fades. Perhaps a future discovery nearby will reveal that ancient people knew the place after all. Perhaps the answer will be mixed, as many real answers are. Stone first, human attention later, ocean over everything. Until then, the deep keeps part of the story to itself. Not because it is hiding a secret in the dramatic sense, like a locked chest waiting for a chosen explorer with excellent hair. It keeps the story because the sea changes what it holds. It presses time into surfaces. It covers, reveals, wears down and preserves in uneven ways. It allows us to glimpse but not always to know. And in that gap between glimpse and knowledge, the imagination settles softly. So as your own thoughts begin to slow, picture the formation one last time. Clear water above it, a broad stone face below. terraces descending into blue shadow, small fish moving where people debate, currents passing over edges that may be natural, may be noticed, may be nothing more or less than stone shaped by time. No need to decide tonight. No need to choose a side in the dark. Let the geologists keep measuring. Let the archaeologists keep asking for evidence. Let the divers keep returning when the currents allow. Let the sea keep moving. And if this quiet journey through stone, water, and uncertainty brought you a little calm, I would be very grateful if you liked the video, subscribed, or left a comment telling us where you're listening from tonight. Perhaps you're close to the ocean. Perhaps you're far inland with only the thought of waves nearby. Either way, for a little while, we have shared the same underwater question. We have looked down into blue depth and found not an easy answer, but a slower kind of wonder. The deep still keeps much to itself. It keeps old shorelines. It keeps wrecks, reefs, bones, tools, anchors, caves, and stones that look almost too arranged. It keeps darkness where light has trouble reaching. It keeps silence, except for the movement of water and the small sounds of living things. It keeps evidence, sometimes carefully, sometimes carelessly. It keeps mysteries, not because mysteries are magical, but because the world is large, old, and difficult to read all at once, and maybe that is enough for tonight. The structure remains below the waves. The question remains beside it. The ocean moves over both. Here, above the surface, the room is still. The night is still. Your own breath is steady. Somewhere far away, water passes over stone, and the deep keeps its answer a little longer. Sleep well, fellow traveller, wherever you are, and whatever shore your thoughts are resting on tonight.